And we are live. We're going live to our local supporters. G'day. Thank you if you're a local supporter. We're here with Keith Nestor, and this will be going live on YouTube in a few weeks from now, but it is lovely to have you.
Thanks for having me, Matt. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, I was surprised that a lot of our local supporters, a lot of them knew who you were and were grateful for the work that you've done, but then some of them were like, who's this guy? Do an introduction or something. So for those who aren't aware of you, give us a little intro, a little bio.
Okay, so I grew up going to church. My dad is a Methodist pastor, and I went into ministry when I was about 20 years old, and served in various capacities in various types of churches for about 22 years before in 2017 I became Catholic. And since then, I've done a lot of different things. And since 2020, I've been doing ministry things with relation to teaching people about studying the scriptures, helping people who are feeling the pull to conversion to Catholicism, and doing things like praying the Rosary. I do a weekly podcast called Unpacking the Mass, where I take the week's readings and I just sort of work through them out loud in front of people on a live stream. And then that goes live on YouTube on Thursdays or Tuesdays, whichever day.
You have a couple of YouTube channels now, is that right?
I do. I have the Keith Nestor YouTube channel, which when I started that YouTube channel, I really didn't know anything about YouTube. I literally just parked a video that someone had made of me giving a talk, and that was just all it was. And then I started another YouTube channel called Rosary Crew with Keith Nestor, which is devoted to praying a live stream rosary every day. And we've been doing that since March 18th of 2020, every single day.
Wow. So it's not like a recorded thing you throw up. It's live every day.
We do have recordings on there.
Yeah.
But I do a live stream rosary every day on there. I've done it every day since March 18th, 2020.
Wow. When you came into the faith, did your wife come with you, or was she already?
So my wife was raised Catholic, went to Catholic school. So of course she knows everything about the Catholic faith, but no, she grew up in the Catholic school, but they never went to Mass. And when I met her, I wanted to date her, but I only wanted to date Christians. And at the time when I met her, I was going to like a Calvary Chapel Bible church. Nice. So I was on fire for the Bible. And I was like studying the scriptures and getting all fired up. And I met this girl. I'm like, hey, do you go to church? Are you a Christian? And she said, well, I'm Catholic. Does that count? And I said, no. Absolutely not. I was like, not a chance. Come to my church with me.
Right. So
she came to me, or she came with me to my church. And I remember like the first night she walked in, and she was looking around like, this is church. And the praise and worship music was happening, and the pastor gave an incredible sermon that lasted about an hour and a half.
But that shocked her.
Yeah, but she looked at me. She said, "This is incredible."
Wow.
She said, "Thank you for bringing me here. What do I do about my Catholicism?" And I said, "Forget about that. That's not Christianity. Okay. That's not real Christianity. You're going to become like, a real Christian with a real relationship with Jesus." So she kind of left Catholicism behind. I went into ministry, and she joined me in Iowa, where I was moving to at the time. I met her in Philadelphia, where she grew up. And then we started this little youth ministry together and got married. And then
in Philly?
No, it was in Iowa.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
So I met her in Philadelphia. That's where she's from. I moved to Iowa to go be a youth pastor, convinced her to come with me. We got married.
Okay.
And then we started this little youth ministry. We had a family, and 22 years of ministry. It was amazing with all this stuff going on. And then when I became Catholic, it was like, well, what am I supposed to do? So she said to me when I converted, when I told her I needed to do this, she was like, okay, I'm proud of you for the search that you're on. I don't know what I think about this, but I'm willing to come with you for the sake of our children who were teenagers at the time. Now, they weren't so fired up about it. So that was tough because our family was divided. I quit my job in the Methodist church, became a Catholic, and I was just going to church, and she would come with me. And I remember she would just be mad at me all day. She'd come in Sundays and she would sit there and she would just cry. And then she would get angry because she was going through this grieving process really of, hey, her identity was, I'm a pastor's wife.
Right.
This is who I am. I left all this other stuff behind. What are you doing? Like, why did you blow up our life? So she was trying to work through all that. And it took a long time. And finally, she started to have her own journey. I remember listening to other converts talk about the mistakes they've made when they've come in and their spouses haven't.
What were some of them?
Just
because we actually have a lot of people who watch and they'll share with us that I'm becoming Catholic, my wife isn't, or I'm becoming Catholic, my husband isn't, and it must be a perilous road.
It is, and the biggest mistake I think we can make when our spouses aren't with us on that journey is to not be patient with them, and to make every conversation about Catholicism, and every little thing that we learn about, and we go, oh wow,
yeah,
this is awesome. Did you know about this? And they're just like, I don't care what it is that you keep talking about. If all you do is talk about it, they're going to get sick of it. So I was like, okay, I don't want to impose this on everybody in my life, but I'm so excited about it. What do? I didn't want to hide it either. So I tried really hard with her to not go there. But I mean, a husband and wife relationship, you're going to talk about these things. But the biggest mistakes you can make are trying to impose what you're doing on other people when they're not ready for it.
Yeah, because we all have had that experience. When people have done that to us, it's extremely off-putting.
Oh, it happened to me. Like, I would have become Catholic probably a lot sooner for a variety of reasons. But there were a few instances I had some bumps in the road where there were some unhelpful things said to me from other Catholics or by other Catholics that kind of made me stop and go, oh, okay.
Like what?
Well, I remember once I met with a priest, and the first thing he said to me was, when I was sharing with him my where I was in this journey, and I had just started to like learn about Catholicism. I didn't really know anything about it growing up. The only thing I knew about Catholicism was what other Protestants had told me, which you know how that goes. Most of it's wrong. So as I'm beginning to learn from a few Catholics in my life that really do know their faith, and I'm starting to get interested in it, I went to meet with this priest, and one of the first things he said to me was, well, whoa, hold on. I explained to him my story, and he goes, your marriage isn't valid. You do know that, by the way.
Thanks, man.
And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, your wife was brought up Catholic and you got married outside the Catholic Church. You didn't get a dispensation for that. So I have to tell you that you're not really married. And, technically he was right.
Was it how he said it?
Well, he wasn't like being a jerk about it, but I just think it was the wrong time for me to hear that. And because my heart certainly wasn't ready for that.
Yeah.
So when I heard that, the first thing I thought of was, well, then I'm out.
Yeah.
I can't go down this road anymore. And then another time I was with a group of Catholics, and we'd been having an amazing experience together. And this person just looked at me, who I didn't even really know them very well, but they knew that I was a Protestant. I was kind of on a pilgrimage. I was a fish out of water. And this person said to me, I don't know how you could have ever left the church. How could you ever walked away from what Christ has done in his church and the Eucharist and all? And I'm just like, whoa.
Well, first of all, you didn't walk away from it. It was never yours to begin with.
Exactly.
Was it? Yeah.
And I remember,
but even if it had been, that's not a very charitable way of putting it.
I just said, look, I didn't walk away from anything. I was born like this. I didn't know anything.
Yeah.
And I don't want to blame that, everybody always has those stories of, well, this person said that to me, so therefore I don't have to follow the truth. But I'm just saying, like, I wanted to, when I was in that position, and I'm sure I failed 1,000 times, but I wanted to do the best I could to not be unhelpful to the people that were closest to me that were wrestling with what happened to Keith. Why is he Catholic? Why did he mess up our whole lives? Why did he walk away? I mean, I was their pastor, and they're like, we listen to you every week. You're our guy, and now what happened to you? I didn't want to represent the church to them in a way that was going to come off as though now I'm some kind of elitist, or now I'm just smarter than you are, or now I don't think you're
a Christian
anymore. So that's been tough. But with my family, there's all those other dynamics. But anyway, with my wife, she had to get to that point where God brought her in her own way on her journey, right? And I remember it was really awesome how she would talk about, okay, when we were coming home from Mass, she would talk about different things she experienced and say, why do they do that? What's it? And I'd say, you didn't learn that when you were in Catholic school? No. And what's the deal with this? We would talk about these things, and she would begin to sort of open her eyes. And the way she would describe it to you, the Lord one time just kind of bashed her over the head and said, maybe if you would open your eyes and stop having such a hardened heart, you might see the beauty that your husband saw in my church. So she started to kind of begin to open her eyes to it. And then a year after I came into the church, which was October 8th, 2017, kind of a random day. I'll tell you more about that later. But we were on a pilgrimage to Medjugorje. We went over there. I had gone there years earlier when I was still a Protestant, like way long time ago.
Interesting.
And we had been invited to go back. So I was a Catholic. It was my first year, my 1 year anniversary. We were there, and we just arrived there, and it was great. The last night of the pilgrimage, we were at adoration, and it was late at night, and then I could tell God was working on my wife's heart pretty hardcore. Something's going on with her, and this guy comes over and says, "Hey, let's go over to Victor's and get some pizza," which is kind of the local pizza joint in Medjugorje that you go to.
Yep.
So we go over there, and she says to my friend who invited us, "Hey, what time does confession get done?"
Oof.
And
that's powerful, man.
it is.
You must have been.
She had a really bad experience as a little girl in confession. She had a priest tell her, she was in 4th grade, Matt, and she had a priest tell her when she confessed the sin of not going to mass because nobody took her, and then she received the Eucharist at like a chapel at the school. He said to her, "You're a waste of Catholic education. You don't belong here. And your parents don't deserve to have you in this Catholic school." And he just basically chastised this little 9-year-old girl for this terrible sin. So she had this like super PTSD around confession. And when we were coming into the church together, I mean, for her, and I kind of gave her a hard time because I'm like, all you had to do is go to confession once. I had to do all this stuff to come into the church. I've been studying all this stuff for all these years. But when she went to confession with our priest, she told him, she said, "Look, I'm going to do this, but I'm just letting you know I got a real problem with it." You know, she's a Philly girl. So he was like, "Oh, you're feisty." Well, at this thing in Medjugorje, she felt like God was saying to her, "You need to go to confession." And she was resisting it. So at like 9:45 at night, we walk out of the pizza place. My buddy had said, "Well, they're there until 10, but you're probably never going to get anybody now. It's late at night." So at least she could have said, "Okay, well, I tried, Lord." You know, we do that sometimes. We walked over there, and there was one priest with an English-speaking little flag there, all by himself, which that never happens over there. And she walked up to him, and he said, "I've been waiting for you." And I'm sitting in the back. I don't know what's going on. I'm just watching because it's outside. And they're going through this thing, and she's talking with her hands, and he's laughing, then he's crying, and it lasts for like 25 minutes.
Wow.
And then at the end of it, she gets up and she gives him this huge hug. And he's got tears streaming down his face. She's got tears streaming down her face. She walks over to me and she's like, "Let's go." And I was like, "What's your penance? Don't you have to do something?" She goes, "He didn't give me one."
Okay.
And I said, "Well, you got to tell me about that." And at the same time, I'm trying to absorb what just happened. And I don't want to like intrude on their confessional experience. Basically, she had an experience where he read her soul. You know, you hear about the saints being able to do that. And he basically told her what her situation was, how she had come on this trip needing God to speak to her. She'd been in this limbo for a long time, not sure what to do, feeling kind of lost and all these other details. And he said, "And this is your last night, and you didn't want to be here, but the Lord told you to come to see me."
Wow.
And she just dumped her guts out to him. And what he told her was, "Keep doing what you're doing. God loves you more than you will ever know, and just be patient, and something is right around the corner." And that was all she needed, right? One of the things that she struggled with was the fact that when I left my career in ministry, you know, I just went from, that was my identity in my life, to now I'm working secular jobs. I'm not, nothing, which I was cool with. Okay. I didn't become a Protestant to Catholic going, how do I be the next Scott Hahn? Or how do I have a podcast? Or how do I tell people? I didn't want anything to do with any of that. And it wasn't because I was against it. I just felt like the hardest part for me to conversion at the end was, can I let go of my ministry? Can I let go of my identity? Because that's how I felt like God loved me, was because I was this pastor, right? And to not have that, I didn't really know what I was going to do. And when I was able to truly let that go, it was like, I didn't just let it go. I just pushed it away and said, "Fly away." And so for me, I had worked so hard to make that sacrifice and to let it go. And now that I had done that, I didn't want to be thinking about, well, how do I do that again? How do I give talks and write books and all this kind of, like, the things that people do? And I remember even my priest said to me, he said, "Keith, people are going to get you to try to do stuff because of your background, just don't do anything for a year. You don't need that.
Good advice.
Just fly under the radar. And I was cool with that. So I went to mass every week. I kept a very low profile. I didn't, try to make myself known to anybody. I just was absorbing being Catholic. And I was so fired up about it because I was on a journey for so many years to get there. When I finally became Catholic, I felt like this is it. I can die now. I'm Catholic, right? This is it. And I'm so jazzed about it. The last thing I was going to try to do was be like, okay, Lord, but now what about this? And now what about that? None of it mattered. I felt like I was laying down my life for Christ in order to take up a new life in Christ. I didn't want to have an ulterior motive of, well, okay, now how do I sneak back into getting that again?
Yeah.
So, but for her, that was a struggle because she felt like, and my dad, who's a pastor, they felt like, they're like, Keith, you have gifts for ministry and we don't think God's done with you yet. So you need to be thinking about that. And I just kept pushing that away. No, I don't want to do it. And everybody would say, when are you going to write a book? When are you going to write a book? And I'm like, I'm not that guy anyway. I'm not super smart. I'm not super academic. I'm not some big scholar. I'm just like a down-to-earth, practical guy who loves Jesus and wants to understand what it means to follow him every day. I don't claim to be some brilliant guy. So for me, I was like, I'm not a book guy. Well, the day after that confession, we're on the bus heading home we're heading back to Split, Croatia to get ready to catch the flight. And at 5:25 is kind of a big deal over there. Everybody stops whatever they're doing and they pray. Because that's when allegedly an apparition is happening or whatever. So on the bus, and I'm thinking, well, we're not there anymore. Do we need to do that? But everyone just kind of does that. And as we're praying, you've seen The Matrix, right? Mm-hmm. You know the scene where Neo, like, he gets hit in the head with that thing and he goes, I know Kung Fu. It's like everything's downloaded to him. Out of nowhere, this lightning bolt hits me in the head. And I grab my phone and I start typing on the notes on my phone. And Estelle's like next to me, my wife, and she's like, what are you doing? We're praying, you heathen, put your phone away. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And I just started typing down The Convert's Guide to Catholicism, your first year in the church. And I showed it to her. I said, this is the book I have to write.
Wow.
It hit me out of nowhere, Matt. And I just knew everything. It was like, boom. And so I got off that bus and I said to her and one other guy, I said, this is the book I have to write. And when we got back, I started trying to figure out, how do I write a book? I don't know what I'm doing. And I sort of like went away to this monastery, and I would take little trips for a couple days at a time, just kind of working through it. And that's how my first book came about. And it was a book written, it's not an apologetics manual. It's not to convince someone to become Catholic. It's a book that's written to people who have already decided they want to become Catholic.
Yep.
But now what? Right? Like, what's it like being a new convert? Because I've never read a book like that before. I've read lots of books that tell you why you should be Catholic,
right,
and that want to tell you all the devotional things about being Catholic and all of the nuanced things about being Catholic, and here's this saint and that. But how do you find a local church when you are a Protestant, become Catholic, and you're trying to like search for a church? How do you do that?
I want to tell you about a course that I have created for men to overcome pornography. It is called strive21.com/Matt. You go there right now, or if you text STRIVE to 66866, we'll send you the link. It's 100% free, and it's a course I've created to help men, to give them the tools to overcome pornography. Usually men know that porn is wrong. They don't need me or you to convince them that it's wrong. What they need is a battle plan to get out. And so I've distilled all that I've learned over the last 15 or so years as I've been talking and writing on this topic into this one course. Think of it as if you and I could have a coffee over the next 21 days and I would kind of guide you along this journey. That's basically what this is. It's incredibly well produced. We had a whole camera crew come and film this. And I think it'll be a real help to you. And it's also not an isolated course that you go through on your own, because literally tens of thousands of men have now gone through this course. And as you go through the different videos, there's comments from men all around the world encouraging each other, offering to be each other's accountability partners and things like that. Strive21, that's strive21.com/Matt, or as I say, text STRIVE to 66866 to get started today. You won't regret it. I want to talk about your book because I think that's so important to help new Catholics kind of survive those first few years. But I really want to go back and ask, as a Methodist pastor, how did Catholicism even come on the radar?
Well, so I was running this youth ministry, okay, and we started, this was a little church of about 250 people. I had never been in ministry before. You know, I wasn't qualified to take this job. I had no business doing this, but they offered me the job. And we started with about 12 kids. Just sort of like, okay, I'll just do the things I know how to do. You know, teach the Bible, lead some worship, have a good time. And this little youth group grew to about 300 kids every week. And this little church grew to about 1,000 people. So this little youth group just blew up the town. And it blew up our church. And it was pretty exciting. It was amazing. And as that's kind of happening, I'm trying to figure out, well, okay, well, now I guess I got to like become legit, right? So I got to have a logo and a name for our youth group. I can't just call it youth group. We got to have something to put on stickers and water bottles and t-shirts. So I was looking for a graphic designer who would help me design something because I wasn't going to leave it to like a 7th grader to, you know, come up with our logo or whatever. So
what year is this?
This is 1997.
Fantastic.
Okay. So a long time ago, right?
Yeah.
No internet.
Yeah.
No cell phones. Just like, you know, I mean, I think I had a pager at the time or something, but I found this guy named Devin Schott, who I know you know, Devin,
Amazing.
in the Yellow Pages. And I called him up and I explained to him, you know, what I was doing and what I needed. And he sounded pretty excited about it. And he said, okay, I'll come up with something for you. And he invited me over to his house to look at his ideas. And I remember the night it was either my first or second wedding anniversary. And I told Estelle, I said, hey, I got to go check out this guy's logos. I'll be back in about.
What's the name of your wife?
Her name's Estelle.
That's such a great name.
Oh, it's great. And her mom's name.
I know I met her. I just forgot
Estelle.
that was her name.
Yeah.
Estelle. It's beautiful. We need to bring Estelle back. Keep going.
Her mom's name is Estelle, and her dad's name is Walter. And
her dad's name was Estelle.
And her brother's name is Walter. So it's Estelle and Walt. Estelle and Walt.
I love it.
Anyway, I'll be back in like 20 minutes. I go over to Devin's house, and I'm walking up to his front door, and he's got like statues on the porch. And I'm like, okay, what's up with that? He opens the door, and I go into his house, and it's very Catholic looking, which you guys are probably used to here in Steubenville, but icons everywhere. There's no TV in the house. There's like a grand piano in the living room and beautiful leather furniture, and there's a little bowl of water by the door. Remember, I know nothing about Catholicism at this point, but I'm in seminary.
Why is there a bowl of water?
Yeah, I'm like, what are you? He invites me in, sits down at his formal dining room, and he opens up this little folder and is showing me these designs. And I was blown away. I mean, he's so gifted.
He is very
He's
talented.
Designed so many book covers in the Catholic world.
He's done some of mine.
Yeah, they're incredible.
Before I even knew him.
He's amazing. And so I'm looking at this and I'm like, wow, this is incredible. And you know, the thought that was running through my head, Matt, was I need to convert this guy so he can become part of our youth ministry, because he's about the same age as I am. And I could tell he had a fiery personality, and he talked about the Lord. He talked about Jesus. So I'm like, this is going to be easy. So I just said to him, I'm like, dude, are you a Christian? He's like, yeah. And I'm like, really? What's with all this Catholic stuff, man? You know, what is that? And he just started laughing. And he's like, well, I'm a Catholic Christian, you know? And I just said, okay. And I'm sitting here trying to think about, how do I do this? Because, I mean, we converted Catholics every week in our church. Most of the people in our church were ex-Catholics, supposedly, you know. And most of the kids in my youth group Wednesday night were coming over after CCD class. They'd come over to our church, or they would skip CCD class to come to our church because it was the fun church, right? So I wasn't worried that I wouldn't be able to make him a Protestant. I just thought, how do I do this in the right way? So
Did you consider yourself a Protestant?
Oh, yeah, 100%. 100%. So, you know, like I said, I didn't know a lot about Catholicism, but I thought I knew a lot about Catholicism. And in my mind, I just have to tell him the gospel. Yeah. And he'll go, wow, I've never heard that before. Like every other Catholic I talk to, what do I do now? And then I could tell him, and that'd be that.
What was your biggest, I want to get back to Devin, but what was your biggest misconception, would you say, about Catholicism?
I think my biggest conception about Catholicism is that they didn't know their Bibles. Because to me, the Bible was everything. Right? I mean, being a guy who kind of came into his faith really strongly in Calvary Chapel, which is all about, I mean, you saw the Jesus Revolution. That's all those guys,
I loved
right?
It. I thought it was a great movie.
That's the guys, right? And so for me, I figured, well, Catholics just have little homilies. They have all these rituals. They have all these sacraments, but they don't know their Bibles, because none of the Catholics I knew their Bibles. So that was my biggest misconception. And when I started talking about the Bible with Devin, he knew it better than I did. And he started challenging me on things like, oh, yeah, you love the Bible. Let's look at John chapter 6.
So is this the first night when you're there?
First night, within 20 minutes of meeting him.
Tell me how you, because you said it would be as easy as telling him the gospel and he'd become Protestant.
Yeah.
So tell me how that went. How did you begin that, and how did he react?
I asked him the question. I said, Devin, are you saved? If you died tonight, would you go to heaven? Do you have a personal relationship with the Lord Jesus? Those were the questions that I asked him, because I wanted to know how a Catholic would answer. And I assumed that he wouldn't have a good answer to that.
Yeah, I'm sure usually Catholics were just deer in headlights, didn't know how to answer it.
It's like all the Ray Comfort videos you've ever seen on YouTube, where he asks the kids on the college campuses, and they just go, yeah. That's what I expected. But that's not what I got. But that's how I started. I just asked him those questions. And he began to fire back to me things about baptism, and things about the Eucharist, and things about the authority of the church. But he didn't just like beat me over the head with a bunch of words I didn't understand, and a bunch of like hoity-toity kind of sounding platitudes that sometimes us Catholics can give to people. You know, he didn't call me a heretic. He didn't call me a schismatic. None of that stuff. We just had a conversation. But that's how I started. I just wanted to be bold with him and come right out and go for it.
And so what was your impression? Were you thinking you're a Protestant and you just don't realize it? If you're meeting someone who's Catholic and he knows the Bible, how did you respond to his depth of biblical knowledge?
It was like I didn't know what to do with it. I was shocked. And I thought, okay, this is going to be a little harder than I thought.
But we'll get there. Yeah.
But what was going on across the table was he was sitting there thinking, okay, I got to make Keith a Catholic. So the more our friendship developed, because we kind of linked up pretty quickly that night in terms of just personality wise, and I felt like we were going to be good friends. But what happened was that night before I left, and remember it was my anniversary, so I'm also thinking I got to get home.
Yeah.
About 2 hours later, his wife yells down from upstairs. She's like, "Doesn't Keith have to leave?" And I'm like, "Oh,
good woman who understands how your wife's feeling."
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I remember Devin. He goes, "Hey, before you go, I got something for you." He said, "This guy was like you, only worse," and he became a Catholic. And he handed me a VHS tape.
Come on.
With a guy that looks like my dad shaking hands with the Pope. We all know what that was, right?
Dr. Hahn?
Yeah, the Scott Hahn conversion story. I'd never heard about that.
Sure.
I went home a couple hours late, and I think I watched it the next day, and I was blown away by Dr. Hahn. I was just like, this is amazing, because now I was listening to someone who spoke the language I spoke, but way more advanced than even I was,
Yeah.
And to hear his conclusions. So at the same time, I'm going to a Presbyterian seminary. So I'm listening to this and I'm starting to go, okay, surely my professors will have answers to these issues. Okay. So Devin and I would get together. We would talk about things. He was giving me like these apologetics booklets and magazines and manuals. Remember, the internet wasn't a thing yet. Mm-hmm. And we would argue and yell at each other, and we'd almost come to blows a couple times.
You did not.
Oh, we did.
Tell me about this, because I've heard people say this.
Okay.
And I always think, is it exaggeration?
No, there's not. There's two times I'll tell you about. The first one was we were sitting outside of a burger place in Davenport, Iowa, on 4th Street, I believe, maybe it was 2nd Street, and we had just had lunch, and we got into a heated conversation, and by this time, the gloves had sort of come off. We weren't trying to be cordial to each other anymore. Maybe we were a little familiar and comfortable, so we could really say what we thought. And we were just like toe to toe talking about what this particular saint said and what the scripture teaches on this. And I remember people were starting to gather around us. And I'm like, we got to chill.
To listen, or because they were worried?
I think they were worried, like, what's going on here? And then they heard us talking about, well, St. Ignatius of Antioch. Then they're like, okay, these guys are just nerds.
Angry nerds.
The other time was on the first trip to Medjugorje that I went on to with Devin and a bunch of his Catholic friends.
Okay.
Now, this is like 2002-ish, firmly Protestant.
Okay.
I got suckered into going on this pilgrimage because we were going to Rome. I didn't know anything about Medjugorje. I'm like, what's all this?
Sure.
But yeah, you take me to Rome? Sure, I'll go. So I went on this trip. And
why were you even open to going to Rome with Devin? at the time?
Because I'm Italian and I was making like $23,000 a year, and like a trip to Europe was never.
It was free.
It was free.
Oh,
yeah.
Come on, you got to go. That's why I went.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a friend of ours invited me to go on this pilgrimage. What I found out later was this guy had a major conversion experience over there and was very successful in business. So he, like, part of his mission in life was he would bring 25, 30 people a year on these pilgrimages. So his daughter was coming to my youth group. So I remember we went out to lunch one day, and Devin introduced me to this guy. And he's like, Keith, my name's Greg Hansen. My daughter goes to your youth group.
This is in Italy?
No, this was in Davenport.
Okay.
So I thought, I'm in trouble because I'm corrupting his Catholic daughter with my Protestant heresy. And he said, I just want to thank you because she comes home every Wednesday night so on fire for her faith.
Praise the Lord.
So in love with Jesus. So thank you for what you've done for her. And as a way to repay you, I'd like to invite you on an all expenses paid trip. We're going to go to Rome and we're going to go to a little place called Medjugorje. And I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. So
did your wife go with you?
No, she didn't go with me on that trip. And we had little kids at the time. So I went very, very kind of reluctantly. But on this trip, though, I was starting to become open to some things related to Catholicism. I was very interested in it, but I was still firmly convinced that it wasn't for me. And while, like, the second night or the first night we were there, we were at some ice cream joint or something, gelato or whatever. And I should have just kept my mouth shut. But they were saying something, and I felt very, like, I was still at the point where I was very defensive.
Yeah. Fair enough.
You know, I was very, my guard was up, Matt. You know, I'm learning a little bit about Catholicism. And this is the other thing that I carry with me these days when I'm talking to people.
That's right, yeah.
You know, if when we're talking to somebody about the faith, oftentimes people say to me, well, they're just not listening. They're not getting it. No. Nothing is getting through. And what I always tell people is, you don't know that. Because things often get through, but because it's sometimes framed in like a contest or a crusade of conversion, if you're the person on the receiving end of that, you don't want to let anyone know that there's a kink in your armor, or that something made sense, because if you do, they're just going to pounce on you. So things were starting to make sense to me. Things were starting to appeal to me a little bit. Some of the questions I had asked my seminary professors that they had no answers to.
Can we pause, put a pin in Rome?
Sure.
I want to go back.
Okay.
Because I know Dr. Hahn, I've read his book, Rome Sweet Home. I love that Dr. Hahn's the biggest gateway drug to Catholicism there's ever been, you know. So many people have sat where you've sat who've been Protestant.
I know.
Have you met Dr. Hahn?
Yeah, I have actually,
good. All right. Tell me the questions you brought up to your seminary professors and tell me their responses.
So the first one I brought up to them was, it was about Matthew 16:18. You know, upon this rock I will build my church. And because to me, I was quickly discerning the linchpin of Catholicism is the papacy. It's the authority of the church. And that became very apparent to me very early. And I remember feeling like all I have to do is find one instance where the Pope has contradicted a doctrine officially and all that stuff, and one instance where the church has done all these things or whatever, and the whole thing's going to crumble. Or I had to find a way to poke a hole in that idea by understanding the real way to interpret Matthew 16, which I'm sure my professors were going to tell me.
Yeah.
So when I asked her, it was an Old Testament professor, because the New Testament guy was gone that day. And I said to her, what do we believe about this? And she said to me, well, that's about Peter's faith. Right? The faith is the rock upon which Jesus will build the church. And I said, well, why do we believe that? Because so many of these quotes that I'm seeing from the church fathers make it pretty clear that it's Peter. And her answer to me was, well, because we're Protestants, duh. And I remember thinking, that is not a great answer.
Do you think she kind of got caught flat-footed and was trying to be humorous?
I don't know. I don't know what her deal was. But she didn't, I mean, I certainly didn't laugh when she said that. I kind of looked at her like I had my own deer in the headlights moment there, because I expected her to be able to show me something pretty clearly and pretty easily what this was all about. And she didn't. Then I went to the my church history professor, who became the dean of the seminary later. And I started asking him questions about the early church and the papacy and things about what the church believed about the Eucharist. And I was shocked, Matt. He did not come across, and this is a Presbyterian seminary. So typically Reformed. It was PCUSA, so more of the liberal side of things. But his response was, "Oh, you're thinking about Catholicism. That's wonderful." He's like,
"No, it's not."
I was like, no, dude, I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
Like, I'm here to like win a convert. And his demeanor about it was not at all like, all right, well, here's what you got to say to convert people. He was like, oh, that's beautiful. And here's where we have a different point of view. But he made it sound very reasonable to be a Catholic, which that caught me off guard. So those were, I think, the two things that really at the seminary level hit me. There was one other instance where I asked a guy who was the chair of a theology department at a different school. This was years later when I was much more closer to converting. Our own denomination was going through chaos, the United Methodist Church, which is a complete disaster right now. And I said to him, without an external authority beyond the scriptures to help us understand how to interpret the Bible authoritatively, what hope is there for us? How are we going to see our way through this mess that we're in? Because this was a mess that related to the lack of authority, ultimately, and then the consequences of that. And he just looked at me and he just goes, sucks to be Protestant, doesn't it? And then he laughed. And I'm like, wow, man, they really don't know what to say. Now, to be honest, to be fair, it wasn't like I was going to church with Dr. James White or somebody like that who would have said, oh, come into my office and I'll tell you.
Yeah. It's not that there weren't answers or even answers that would have convinced you at the time. It's just you weren't getting them.
I wasn't getting them. So I was feeling more and more drawn to Catholicism, but I couldn't let these guys know that. I couldn't let Devin know that.
All right. So back to Rome.
So
you said you had your defenses up.
Yeah, I had my defenses up. We were in Medjugorje at the time, and he said something just matter-of-factly about that the Catholic Church is the one true church and that, whatever. And I just made a comment. I don't even remember what I said. And he stood up, I stood up, and we started yelling. And they're like, you better get out of here. So we went outside. So we were standing outside on the street corner kind of going at it. And I maybe it's in my own mind I created this, but I think I remember there being like people in uniforms coming around to like talk to us about this and like get us to calm down. So that was like day 1 or day 2 of that first trip. And I was like, I need to chill. I just need to absorb this and just let whatever happens here happen and then deal with it later. And on that trip, that was the first time I really saw Catholics worshiping Jesus through Mary. And that freaked me out and blew me away at the same time. Yeah. Because I thought it was beautiful. But I felt sort of like an outsider. Like I wanted to be a part of it, but I didn't feel like I could. But
what was beautiful about it?
Just how much they loved to pray. How much they loved to worship. Like when you talk about, hey, we're going to go to Mass today, or we're going to go to this thing called adoration, or we're going to pray the Rosary. Where I came from, you did what you had to do. You checked it off the list. And then you go and you did the stuff you really wanted to do the rest of the day.
To be fair, that's most Catholics as well.
I understand that.
Yeah.
But the people on this trip weren't like that. They were, and nobody there was like that. Now, I didn't know anything about Marian apparitions or any of that stuff. Our trip really wasn't about that. I mean, it kind of was, but it kind of wasn't. But for me, I just saw how in love with Jesus these people were and how in love with Mary they were and how those two things didn't seem to be a contradictory.
Their love of Mary didn't extinguish it, rather
100%. Which was the misconception I'd always had about them. So I'm seeing this and I there was a part of me that like I really wanted that. But I felt like it wasn't for me. And I was wrestling through a lot of those things on that trip. And when I got home, I remember feeling like, okay, what am I going to do with this experience? Am I going to just leave it there, or is it going to be a part of my life? But I didn't know what to do with it. The other thing that I saw over there that was so beautiful within our group was just the different type of community that Catholic community really is.
Okay.
Because and I know that I know there's always exceptions to everything, but this was my experience. I come from a tradition that everything's very segmented, right? You have the youth over here, you have the adults over here, you have the 20-somethings over here, the 30-somethings with little kids over here. Everybody's always chopped up into these little groups. You have 8 different times of worship services because not because you need the space, but because these people don't like this music, and you have, everyone just has their own thing they want church to be for them, including their community. And in Catholicism, I was blown away by the fact that you didn't have that. You just had all these people of all different types of walks of life, all different life stages, all different parts in their journey of faith, all coming together, loving each other in this incredibly beautiful way in the faith. And that was something that I looked at, and I remember feeling like, this is probably a lot what heaven is going to be like. And I've never really thought that before in my life, like that I've ever been in a place where I've experienced that and thought, this is probably a taste of heaven. And that's what I felt like. And there was just something in me that wanted to be a part of it. But I had so much on the line with my life that I didn't think I could. I'm like, well, that's not for me. I'm a Protestant pastor. Anyway, I want to go back to this one spot. So that street corner where Devin and I got in this big fight in Medjugorje. Years later, as a Catholic, on that second trip, when I was there with my wife and Greg, the same guy who brought me the first time, we were walking down the street, and he says, "Hey, Keith," and he points to that corner. He says, "Remember that?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" I'd forgotten all about it.
Yeah. He
said, "That's where you and Devin got in that big fight right there." I'm like, "Oh, yeah." Well, I had this picture that someone had just given me of the Blessed Mother on me, and I said, "Take a picture." So I held a picture of me standing on that corner with the Blessed Mother, and I texted it to Devin, and I just said, "You win," and sent that to him. So
what was it like going into the Vatican and to St. Peter's as a Protestant?
Oh, I was blown away. I was like, first of all, you know what it's like just as a human going in to see something.
I took Cameron Bertuzzi, of course,
I saw
a couple of years ago, and we went it was nice to see his reaction to that as well.
It really was amazing, just from the standpoint of, seeing an incredible thing. But I felt like, okay, the church is a lot bigger than what I think it is. And yet it's a lot smaller than what I think it is at the same time. And what I mean by that is, oftentimes the Protestant understanding of the church is really hard to put your finger on, because in one sense, it's just about your little local church, and that's it. Your priest, or your priest, I guess if you're an Anglican or whatever, but your parish pastor, your priest, whoever's in charge of you, he's your pope or she's your pope. And that community is where you live out your faith, and that's the church for you. So in one sense, I was learning, the church is much bigger than this. It's worldwide. It's universal. It's crazy. But then it's smaller than what you think it is, from the standpoint that if you ask a Protestant, well, what does the Bible mean when it uses the church as a term? Well, it means all believers everywhere, in all times and all places. It's everyone who claims to be a Christian is part of the little c church. So in that sense, I learned that it was smaller than that view, because it actually had boundaries around it. It has a visible head. And there I was in front of it. Pope John Paul II, St. Pope John Paul II was there. We got to see him out the window. But what really hit me in Rome was when we went to St. John Lateran, which, you know how they have the pictures of all the popes up there. I was standing in there looking at that, because they have all of the different, years of when each person was a pope, all the way back to St. Peter. And I remember standing there looking at that. That made bigger an impact on me than St. Peter's, to be honest with you. Because it was at that moment when I was like, wow, Catholicism really does go back to Peter and to
really
Jesus.
Does. I did the Scovey tour when I was in Rome last, and getting to see St. Peter's tomb beneath the main altar at St. Peter's, knowing that he was crucified upside down at one of Nero's circuses, and that early Christians came and paid reverence to him and prayed at his tomb, and that several altars have been built over the history. But
it's incredible when it's almost like what people say when they talk about going to the Holy Land. It's like, okay, it all became more real to me on another level. And when I was in Rome, seeing that became real to me on another level. Like, there is a church that Jesus started. That's the biggest thing, I think, for Protestants to begin their journey, is recognizing what it means that Jesus started a church. Because I never hear Protestants claim that he started their church, but Catholics say that all the time. And that was always kind of like a strange thing to say for me to hear, or a strange thing to hear. And I finally, like, it sort of clicked in that moment, like, wow. Then all those passages in the Bible where St. Paul talks about the pillar and foundation of the truth is the church. And in Matthew 18, when Jesus talks about how you resolve differences, if you can't do that with a group of a few witnesses, take it to the church. All these different things I'm seeing in the book of Acts, all of these things about how the disciples were led and how the decisions that these men made under the power of the Holy Spirit, this is a fulfillment of what Jesus said was going to happen with his church. And then when they made those decisions, they didn't just go, okay, here's what we've decided to do in our church, but you all out there in the world, you do what's best for your context and your culture and how you see it and what the scriptures mean to you. No, they sent out people and said, this is what we've decided. And there wasn't a conference or a debate. That already happened. And they made the decision, and that was it for everyone. And I started to see how the church functions in the book of Acts and beyond. And then, of course, when you connect that with the history that Catholic converts have always talked about being so important to them, and it was for me too, seeing the first centuries of the church functioning in a Catholic way, it just kind of hit me in the face, you know?
All right, so you're still a Methodist pastor at this point in your trip at Rome and Medjugorje. What was it like coming back, going back to your office, preaching on Sundays?
You know,
had you at this point made the decision to become Catholic, or as you say, did you think, well, this isn't for me? Maybe I have a lot more respect for the Catholics than I used to. Maybe we can incorporate some of that stuff into our own services. Where were you? And
at that point in my life, I had come back, and that's exactly what I did. I thought, okay, maybe there's some things I can learn about this. I love these Catholics. I love what I experienced, but it's not for me. This is what God's called me to do. This is where God's put me. These people are under my care. That next summer, I had an experience where we were at our church camp, which was a big deal in my life. And we were leading our youth in like a communion service. And one of my friends who was leading it, he started going through you call it the liturgy part. And he was beginning that. And he said, and Jesus took bread and he broke it and he gave it to his disciples. And he said, take this. This represents my body broken for you. Yeah. Which usually that was a time where it was like part 2 to the sermon, where then you just kind of go on a riff about whatever else you talked about and incorporate that into the liturgy or whatever. And when he said that, I felt like the Holy Spirit just hit me in the heart. And it was like Jesus said, that's not what I said. And you know it, Keith. And I walked out of there and I just broke down. And I went down to the front of the lodge area. And I called Devin on the phone. This is like 2004, okay? I called Devin on the phone, and I'm just bawling. He's like, what's going on? And I said, I'm at camp. This is going on. I said, dude, I think God's calling me to become Catholic. And I was like bracing for him to be like, ha ha, you know? And he just goes, he's calling you home, Keith. You know, you need to come home. And I just broke down and lost it. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. And he said, well, whatever you need, I'll be there for you. And
let's just take a pause and say that Devin's one of the greatest men that exists on the face of the earth right now. I mean, I know him somewhat.
Yeah.
What a man.
Yeah. I was like, I'm going to really need this guy in my life, you know? So where I was standing was, you know, right out front of this building where all this was happening. As I'm walking back up, I hear all these kids and they're singing praise and worship songs. The lights are down, you know, it's really an emotional time. I walk in, and I see my beautiful wife, and I see my 3 little kids. She's pushing my son Drew in a stroller. My daughter is worshiping. She's a little girl. My oldest son is probably like maybe 2 at the time, 2 or 3. And I heard this little voice and then whisper in my ear, "You gonna blow all this up? You gonna wreck her life? You gonna destroy her world because you want to become Catholic? Look around. Look at these kids in here. These kids are here because of you, Keith. You're their spiritual leader. You're going to abandon them? You could be costing them their souls. Stop being so selfish. You don't need to become Catholic. You just need to do a better job and stick with what you're called to do." And I became so terrified of what it would cost me. Now, my wife at the time, she was kind of getting a little worried about this, but I kept assuring her, you don't need to worry about anything. I'll never become Catholic.
Did she ever watch that Scott Hahn tape?
No, she's not. Okay. She wasn't interested in that at all. I probably tried to make her at one point in time, and she was like, "What are you talking about? I'm not doing that." Mm-hmm. And she's like, I remember there was probably a couple times she's like, "You're not seriously thinking about becoming Catholic, are you?" I'm like, "Of course not. Not a chance.
Why would you even ask?"
No way. Like, we got, we're important. Look what we're doing. This is amazing. Mm. And I was afraid of obedience because of what it would cost me. So I just was like, oh, shake that off. Mm. And I basically shut that off. And I don't know if I consciously decided not to talk to Devin, but I remember feeling really weird, thinking I can't really talk to him about this. So I just kind of pulled away from him and from my other Catholic friends. And I was just like, I got to forget all this. I got to be done, reading Catholic stuff, doing Catholic things. I can't dance in that world anymore. I have to be all in to where I am. So, basically I was like, forget all that. So that's what I did.
I want to just say, we really don't appreciate how difficult it is for people to convert often. Whether you're Catholic, whether you're Protestant. It's like many Catholics go to a Protestant, they lay it out, and then, as you said, they kind of blame them for not getting it. Whereas you should put yourself in their shoes. I mean, what would it take right now? I asked me the question, what would it take for me to become a Protestant? And it's not just the arguments. It's, as you say, it's the real, I got a job, I have this Catholic podcast, my wife's Catholic, my friends are Catholic, my community is Catholic. What would it take? It would take a lot. I don't know what it would take. I don't even know if it's possible. Even if I became, let's say I became convinced of some branch of Protestantism, version of Protestantism, what would it take? It would take a lot. And I really think we have to keep that in mind as we talk to our Protestant brothers and sisters. And not just brothers and sisters, but our Jewish friends or our, atheist friends. To really appreciate how much this is going to cost them, I think will then influence how we communicate the gospel, and our invitation won't be harsh like it was to you from that fellow who said, how could you possibly leave all this? It won't be like that. It won't be triumphal. It'll just be, as it's been said before, one beggar showing another beggar where the bread is.
Amen. It reminds me of when Jesus was scolding the Pharisees and he said, you bind up all these heavy burdens, but then you don't lift a finger to help people carry them. Technically, what they were teaching them to some degree was true, right? Jesus said, don't ignore what they say, but ignore what they do. But one of Jesus' biggest criticisms for them wasn't about theology. It was about their lack of compassion for people who they were trying to convert.
Really good.
And I think that we have to remember that, when we're inviting someone into Catholicism, and that's when I talk with people about Catholicism now, I hate arguments. My flesh loves them, but to me, presenting Catholicism as an invitation to the greatest adventure in the universe is how I like to present Catholicism to people. It's not, well, this is right, so therefore you better be Catholic or else. It's you have to just experience the beauty of Christ's church and the beauty of the sacraments. And let me tell you how it's changed my life radically. And oftentimes people get really focused on, well, what did it cost you? What did it cost? And I'm fine to talk about that. But what I find these days is people don't always recognize when someone else is in that position. Now, I am honored to be able to do that now. People reach out to me all the time that are in this position. And I'm shocked at how many people there are who are exactly where I was that reach out to me and say, here's where I am. I want to become Catholic, but my wife doesn't want to, or I don't want to lose my job. What do I do? What do I do? It's tough. And that's where I was back in that first kind of go around back in 2004, where I felt like God was saying, no, Keith, you need to do this. But, the other thing we have to remember, Matt, is conversion isn't just for Protestants to Catholics. We're all converts. We're all on the road to conversion, because Christ, the call to conversion doesn't end when you become Catholic. That's when it just begins to a certain degree. We all have to realize that those moments in the sand where God is calling us out to follow him at a deeper level of discipleship, that's a daily walk for all of us. And that's something that we have to remember. Some people begin as atheists. Some people begin as nominal mid-Catholics. Some people begin as Protestants. Some people begin as, super traditionalists. It's just, we all start where we are, but God is always taking us somewhere. The call of the gospel is a call to movement. It's a call to constant conversion and constant death. He's saying, follow me. So we never arrive at that moment where we just pitch a tent and say, here I am. But so many times in Catholicism, I've seen us do this. We plant the flag. We go, I've arrived. Now it's my job to look down on the rest of you idiots and tell you how to get up here to where I am. And yeah, it's going to be tough for you, but suck it up. Offer it up to Jesus, right? Yeah. But instead, we need to take that flag. We need to go down, and we need to help carry those burdens to help people get to that point. And then when we get there, we just lock arms and say, now we're together on the same path here.
That's really important. Thank you. Okay, so how did it evolve? Because I like what you said earlier about the papacy really being the linchpin. Because it seems to me that if you're a Protestant, what's a Protestant to do who becomes convinced of, let's say, the need for purification before heaven, or that we can pray to the saints in heaven? It seems to me that a Protestant can adopt these views while remaining Protestant, even though they'd be in disagreement with many others, but it really is the papacy. All right, so how did you then you said you pushed it away, you didn't want anything to do with it. How did it come back in, and how did you...
So many years later, right?
And also, is your dad a pastor?
He is. He's retired now. But
because I think one of the things I would do if I was becoming a Protestant or an Orthodox, and I was scared of converting, I was scared that the truth was there, I would talk to everybody I know smarter than me, which thankfully is most people, and I would, please help me. Now, you spoke to your professors. Did you ever go to your dad?
I went to my dad later. Okay. I went to him. Well, I shouldn't say that. I did go to him a few times in the beginning.
With just some questions?
Just some questions. My dad's a very brilliant guy. Like, he's got a doctorate in theology. Like, he's a total, like, he's probably read all these books, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, he's very not Catholic. Okay. And he would say things to me. I found myself arguing the Catholic position to him. Yeah. To try to get him to convince me not to become Catholic. And like, I don't know if you ever had that moment with your dad where you realized that you were stronger than he is, or maybe that like you beat him in chess the first time or something like that.
Yeah, or that you're in an argument, you know more than him.
I remember feeling like that a couple times. I hope he's not watching this, but I remember feeling like that a couple times with my dad, where I'm like, you don't have a good answer for this. Like, and that had never happened in my life before. And so I was quickly running out of those people, Matt. I was trying. I was talking to people, but I think there was like two camps of people. There were either the people who didn't really know anything about it, but were just super passionate like I was, and were like, oh, come on, man, forget about that. It's just Jesus. It's just Jesus. It's just Jesus. Not all this religion stuff. It's not all this, denominational boundaries. It's just Jesus, Jesus, which isn't really helpful, because that makes it sound like Catholicism isn't about Jesus. So I had people in that camp who didn't want to like dig into the arguments, or I had people that they dug into the arguments, but they couldn't answer them. So I felt kind of alone in that part of it from that perspective. Now, after that experience at the church camp, when I sort of turned my back on the church and turned my back on my Catholic influences or whatever. Yeah.
The temptation, as it were.
Yeah. I went through a pretty dark time in life. I went through like a dark time spiritually. I went through a dark time in my marriage. I went through a dark time in my ministry, my youth ministry that had blown up to this big thing, started to level off and then started to drop. And I was like panicking and freaking out, because that's my identity, right? I'm this big rock star youth pastor, which sounds ridiculous now, but at the time, it was like a big deal. And I remember just like getting to a point through a lot of darkness where I thought, I just need to be done with ministry. I need to step out of this. I need to focus on my marriage. I need to focus on my own relationship with Jesus. So I'm walking away from like full-time vocational church world ministry. And I spent about a little over a year, working on a boys ranch where we took in troubled teenage boys that were sent there. It's kind of like the last step before jail. And our family moved into this little cabin out on this dairy farm and this little ranch, and we learned how to become farmers, and we had these 4 teenage boys living with us, and we took care of them, and
God bless you.
And it was totally a different experience, not being a pastor, being a farmer, but as I was doing that, I was sort of like going, okay, God, I don't need to be in a big fancy church for you to love me. I don't need to be a rock star youth pastor. I don't need to be perfect, in every way. Because I'm very focused on everything's got to be perfect. Everything's got to have excellence. Everything's got to be the best. We have to be the best. And God was just like, no, you don't need to do any of that. Eventually, I wound up taking a part-time position as a senior pastor in a little evangelical free church in another town with about 30 people in this little church. And I went down there and I was pastoring them. And I was like, look, this church is not going to light the world on fire. We're not going to take the city. We're not going to, be a big mega church. We're going to be who we're supposed to be. And we're going to do two things here. They're like, what's your philosophy of ministry? I'm going to teach you guys the Bible, and we're going to be nice to each other. That's it. That's our big strategy. And they're like, okay. And I was there for about 2 years, and that little church grew. We had an incredible time there. It was amazing, and I loved it.
Were you still a youth pastor? Or
no, I was a senior pastor. I was a head pastor at that point in time. And at the same time, I was also working as like a part-time associate at a different church that was a Pentecostal church in the town that I lived in. So I was in all kinds of weird stuff. So driving down to this church, doing a evangelical free, very intellectual Bible study kind of sermon on Sunday morning. And then I'd drive back to where I lived. I would preach a Bible study sermon to the Pentecostal church Sunday night. So it was just, there was ministry happening, but it was a completely different context. Well, then about a year and a half after I started doing that, one of my other friends who's a Methodist pastor in a different town in a big church, he came to me and said, hey, I need you. Will you come and work with me in this church? It's a big church. We're getting ready to build a $10 million facility. There's a lot going on. I could really use you if you'd be willing to come, and he offered me a really nice salary, and it was a big town. I thought, okay, my kids have lived in this little tiny town we lived in for a while. I think I'm good enough now, like in my own heart, to like go back into this, and my family was in a good place. So I'm like, okay, I just didn't want to make some of the same mistakes I had made in the past, which was basically to sacrifice my family at the altar of ministry. When you're in Protestant ministry and you have a family, there's a lot of pressure put on you to serve the church. It's, God, family, job. But when God and your job are kind of the same, and you're a workaholic, and you're a perfectionist, and you're a prideful human being who wants to be the best, you can easily justify a lot of things that are detrimental to your family, which is, that's what I did. And I was like, I don't want to do anything like that anymore. So I was nervous, but I felt like, okay, we can do this. So we moved to this town. I took this position. I was the pastor of worship and youth and mission. And then I quickly, once I started preaching, they moved me into like a preaching role, to where I was preaching every other week, sharing the duties with the senior pastor of doing all the preaching too.
And at this point, you're not reading Catholic books. You're not reading the church fathers.
All I'm listening to at this point in time in my life is Tim Keller, Mark Driscoll, Matt Chandler, John Piper, all these like Reformed guys, like all these, this is when like the new Young and Restless and Reformed group started coming out. And Mark Driscoll's thing was a big thing, and all that. So I was like devouring Tim Keller, which I still love Tim Keller.
Yeah, I love Tim. God rest his soul.
Yeah, may he rest in peace. But I'm devouring all of this, and I'm loving it. Like, I never became like a full-on Calvinist, but I loved like the way these guys preached.
Yeah, well, there's an intensity to the Calvin strand that there isn't necessarily in other strands of Protestantism.
There really is, and there's this call to masculinity that had really resonated with me. People in the Catholic Church are always talking about the lack of a proper masculinity in Catholicism. And there's that same call in Protestantism, but in some of the Protestant circles, you have the freedom to go as far the other direction as you want. And these guys did that. And I thought it was great. So that's what I'm into. Catholicism at this point in time, I'm like, okay, I don't know if that's even legit anymore. I'd really gone the other way.
Is Devin reaching out to you?
I talked with him pretty sporadically at that point in time. I had left the town that we lived in together, and I was maybe on like a once a year kind of check in with Devin. Hey, how are you doing? Okay, good. And we had kind of given up the idea of trying to convert each other, a while back, and we just decided we were going to be friends, And so I knew that he was never going to become a Protestant, and I think he knew that I was never going to become a Catholic. So we just were like, okay with that. Well, after a couple years in this environment, I was telling you about the crisis that was going on in the Methodist Church, where there was this entire faction of people that are in leadership that are departing from what the church teaches about things like human sexuality and marriage and who can be ordained as a pastor. And, I'm coming from the pretty conservative side of things, and all of this unbiblical stuff is starting to happen around me, and I'm like freaking out. I was the guy that you see on YouTube that's always, complaining about Catholicism. I was that guy for the Methodist guy, not on YouTube though, but I was always like, did you hear what this bishop said? Did you hear what they did? You know how that goes.
Yeah.
And when that started happening, I was coming face to face with the reality that we're in trouble. I loved my local church. I loved it. Loved the people, loved what I was doing, but our denomination is a disaster. It's a mess. Right around that same time, my friend Greg, who took me to Medjugorje the first time, he says, hey, I want to come and take you guys to a movie. So him and his wife drove up, and they took Stella and I to go see this movie called Apparition Hill, which is about Medjugorje. And I hadn't thought about Medjugorje in, a million years. But when we went to see that movie, it was like, it just kind of like reminded me of those pleasant memories of what I experienced, in Catholicism. And we went out to lunch, and I started just kind of sharing with him, man, I think we're in trouble in this denomination. I didn't say anything about Catholic or anything like that, but I'm like, it was really good to see you guys and this movie. And Greg was just very, diplomatic and just very sensitive. He said, Keith, maybe you should start thinking about Catholicism again. And, Greg and Devin were two guys that walked with me through some of that darkness in my life, when I sort of isolated myself from everybody else. So that wasn't lost on me. So he'd kind of like earned the right to really say whatever he wanted to me.
Yes.
And so I said, okay. And he goes, would you be willing to meet with a priest here in your town? He goes, I think I know of a local priest here in your town. And I was like, sure, why not? So we set this meeting up, and it was going to be after a daily mass. And I was like, okay, I hadn't been in mass in, ages. And I went and I sat down, and, a lot of converts have those moments in mass when they go, whoa, something happened. It was amazing. Well, that happened to me, but it wasn't like at the consecration or anything like that. It was the processional. As we're there, they come in, and the deacon has got the gospel, and he's holding it up, and he's doing this. And it's as if he is saying, this is our book. This matters to us. This is who we are. And that just hit me like a ton of bricks, because I was wanting to be biblical. I was the guy that was yelling at everybody, stay with what the Bible says, stay with what the Bible says. And they're saying to me, well, Keith, what's just your interpretation of the Bible? What makes you so smart? Or they were saying to me things like, well, Keith, the Bible's wrong in that area, and I'm learning. I'm like, okay, I can't just talk about the Bible alone. I got to talk about the church. And I'm like, but the church teaches this. And they're like, well, which church are you talking about? And I even had one pastor friend of mine. She said to me, well, then why aren't you Catholic if you believe all this church authority stuff? So I was just like, what'd you say to me?
Good question.
It was like, ugh. So mass happens, and I was like really impacted by that. And I met Father Christopher Podasky afterwards. We went out to lunch, and he's a different kind of guy. Like he doesn't have time for my antics or my stories or my excuses. He listened to me for about 30 seconds, and he goes, okay, so why aren't you Catholic? And I'm like, I don't know. I need more time to think about it. I'm not sure if I think it's true. I said, I just need some time to pray. He goes, no, you don't. He goes, you need to make a decision. You need to make a decision, Keith. And I told him I'd been at this a long time. He's like, you need to make a decision. And so I went home, and by now YouTube is a thing and podcasts are a thing. Okay. Now we're talking 2015.
Okay.
So I find Pints with Aquinas at some point in time. I find Scott Hahn. Oh, he has more than one talk? Wonderful.
Many.
I find all of these things that are floating around. It's way easier to get information now that the internet's a thing. and I'm just devouring things, and I'm feeling like all of this stuff is starting to click with me, and I'm just like feeling more and more drawn. So I go to my senior pastor one day and I say, his name's Pastor Mike. I said, Mike, I think I'm starting to feel drawn towards Catholicism.
And this is the first time he's heard of it.
Yeah. Now he's married to an ex-Catholic, okay, and he has no love in his heart for Catholicism, but he just goes, "You're crazy," and he was just like, "Okay, I think we know how to solve Keith's problem." He said, "I want you to preach a sermon series on the history and nature of the Christian church. That'll cure you." And I'm like, "Are you sure?"
You sure you want that?
That's what I said to him. I said, "Are you sure?" I said, I'm reading some pretty Catholic things. And you know what he said to me, Matt? He said, "Keith, if that's the truth, why wouldn't you tell our people that?" And I said, "Game on, brother." So
did you have to run these lectures by him?
No.
He just gave you the freedom.
He just said, "Go do it."
All right.
So
let's do this.
I preached a sermon series about the papacy. I preached a sermon series. I didn't call it that. I just, see, everything I did was always framed within the context of, we're going to talk about Matthew, whatever, 16 or whatever, we're going to talk about Luke chapter 2. We're going to talk about whatever. So it was always framed in the context of a Bible study, not let me give you a Catholic sounding sermon. We did a sermon series through the book of Acts. And I'm telling you, it could probably be put on any Catholic, publisher's list. It was extremely Catholic. But the real thing that hit me was Advent 2016. I was getting ready to preach a sermon. I was writing 2 sermons, one on what happened when the angel Gabriel came to Zechariah to announce that, he would be the father of John the Baptist. And then the second one would be on the Annunciation, although we just called it Luke chapter 1, And I preached the first sermon on Zechariah, and it went well. And then I was in my office studying the text for Luke chapter 1, for when the angel Gabriel comes to our Blessed Mother. And as I'm writing this sermon, I just become overwhelmed with waves of emotion anytime I would read about the Blessed Mother. And I just start weeping in my office. And I know people always use like weeping, like, oh, I was sad. No, I was like literally ugly crying. It was bad. And I'm in there and I'm just like, I don't know what is going on, but I felt her presence with me as I'm writing this sermon about what happened when Gabriel came to her. So I got up that Sunday and I preached this sermon, how Mary is the new Eve. She's the new Ark of the Covenant. She's the woman of Genesis 3:15, of Revelation 12. I connected all of these things, how in John 19, when Jesus says to her, "Woman, behold your son, son, behold your mother," that's Jesus giving her to us as our mother. I'm preaching this in the Methodist church. I'm talking about what saints said about the Blessed Virgin Mary. I'm putting saint quotes up on the PowerPoint screen and doing all of that. I had no idea that this was, behold your mother, or Hail Holy Queen. I mean, it was right out of that stuff. And I preached that sermon, and you'd think people were looking at me like, what is he talking about? They were also crying. Like, it was crazy. I'd never seen this before in my life. People in the service were just listening, and they were like, because it wasn't being presented to them as Catholicism.
Right.
This is just, hey.
This is not a threat.
This is the Bible.
This is the patristics, yeah.
This is the first gospel in Genesis 3:15. I will put enmity between the woman and the serpent, right? Why does Jesus always call her the woman? We've always been taught that it was a derogatory term in John 2 when he says, "Woman, what have I to do with thee? My hour is not yet come" at Cana. But Jesus is making a statement. John is making a statement. John doesn't have to write that. He could have written or not written that. And yet he chose to show us that Jesus calls her woman. And when I have Protestants now that reach out to me and say, well, he never even called her mother, I'm like, you have such a small field of vision on this. Open it up and look at your Bible. He does that for a reason, right? And I preached that sermon. I remember there was one young man who came down to the front. We didn't do this in our church. And he just fell to his knees at the front of the church and just began to cry. I went and prayed with him. And he's like, I've never heard anything like this before. So I'm like, what is going on? I remember Greg came to visit me and I told him about it. He started crying. And I was feeling like something is happening with the Blessed Virgin Mary in my life. And I don't understand what it's all about. So at the same time this is all happening, my mom is diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and is losing that fight. So I'm, our whole family is falling apart. We're just devastated by this because my mom was a wonderful, vibrant woman of faith who was really like the best person you'd ever meet in your life. And she was perfectly healthy. My parents had a very active, retirement. They just retired, and now she gets hit with this. So I'm making these trips to where they live, and I would go for walks with my dad and just kind of check on him. How are you doing, Dad? And we would talk, and I told him, Dad, I think I'm being drawn towards Catholicism again. I don't know what to do. And he didn't have time to make arguments. He was just like, Keith, you just got to follow the Lord, but there's got to be a way. You can't just quit your job. What are you going to do? You've got teenagers at home. You've got a mortgage. This is your career. There's got to be a way. If that's really what God wants, he'll make a way. And that's what you need to figure out.
Yeah. So
I was wrestling through that pretty hard, trying to figure out what that looked like. And I feel like I'm talking along. Like, if you want to break in, just break in.
If you were boring, I would be.
Okay. Well, we're getting to like a pivotal part here in this story, because that's what's going through my mind. I'm realizing that I can't be in this denomination much longer. I'm feeling the pull to Catholicism, but now all of a sudden it's not about arguments anymore. It's not about church fathers and apologetics. It's about this pull of my heart that I'm feeling towards the Blessed Mother, and that I'm feeling from Jesus. And it's crazy. And I am talking to my wife about it this time. Now now we're like in a totally different place in our life. And I'm like sharing this stuff with her. And I'm wrestling through these things. I wake up one morning. I'm going to have supper with my friend Greg, who I've talked about a lot, that night at 4:00. Okay. I wake up and I'm doing my little devotional thing. I'm praying, and I just felt like the Lord spoke to my heart. I don't know, people say that all the time, and it was like, you got to get a hold of Steve Ray. And I'm like, what? Now, I don't know Steve Ray. I'd seen one of his YouTube videos, like so many others I'd watched. And I remember being impressed with him, but I didn't know him. I didn't know anything about, and I am not the guy who like reaches out to people I don't know. Mm-hmm. I'm always afraid I'm going to be bothering somebody. Mm-hmm. So I'm not the guy who like goes up and talks to the guy at the conference and, and emails the guy and says, hey, I'm not that guy. I'm just like, I don't want to bother these people. So I'm like instantly like, oh, I don't want to, and even if I did reach out to him, I don't even know who he is or how to get a hold of him or anything about it. I just saw a video. So why is this impression in my head? You've got to talk to Steve Ray. So I'm like, what do I do with that? Well, I go to meet Greg for dinner at 4:00, and where he lives and where I live is Iowa City's right in the middle of this. So we meet in the middle. And before he even sits down, he walks in and his phone goes off and he goes, oh, hey, my wife just texted me. Tell Keith Steve Ray is in town giving a talk tonight and you guys should go. And I was like, what? I really want to yell right now Thursday, but I'm not going to.
Told not to.
But I was like,
what? Exclamation mark!
You got to be kidding! Yeah, pounding table forcefully. We got to go. Like, eat your food fast so we can get there. So Greg's like, okay. So we drove to this little parish, Our Lady of Guadalupe in Silvis, Illinois. It was about an hour away from where we were, and on the way, I'm just like a mess. I called Devin. I said, dude, meet us at this parish. He's like, what? Okay, I'll be there. So he meets us there. We walk into this parish and they're having mass and the place is packed. And I'm like, just, okay, Lord, what is going on here? And it came time for the Eucharist. And I went up front, got my blessing, and I just stepped off to the side and I fell to my knees right below the crucifix while people are receiving communion and going back to their seat. And I'm just there having my own little Jesus time. And I looked up at the crucifix and I said, Lord, if you want me to become Catholic, I will do it. But you've got to make a way. You've got to make a way. And the Lord spoke to me from the crucifix in a way I've never heard him speak to me before. And he said, Keith, I am the way, the truth, and the life. You don't need me to make a way. You just need me. And people are receiving the Eucharist. They're receiving Jesus. And that's when it hit okay, I can't have this obedience with boundaries around it anymore, where I'll only do what God wants me to do if it makes sense to me and I approve and I understand and buy into it. Mm-hmm. I was learning in that moment that real discipleship is walking by faith and not by sight. And God has never promised to give you anything other than himself, and he always delivers. But we oftentimes require much more than what he's promised us. We want him to make sense. We want him to take care of the loose ends. We want him to deal with those issues that we have in our circumstances that prevent us from being obedient. And what Jesus says is, nope, you don't get that. But what you do get is me. And I went to the cross for you. It didn't make sense for me. It wasn't easy for me. Mm-hmm. It wasn't something that you could look at and go, oh, I can see how it all fits together. So that hit me, and I went back to my seat, and I was just like, okay, I get it now. I don't have to, because at the time I had gotten past the whole intellectual arguments. I wanted to be Catholic at this point in time, but I was afraid. Mm-hmm. But now it was like, in the past, my fear was of what I would miss if I was obedient, right? I'm going to miss out on all this stuff with these kids. And now I was afraid of what I would miss if I was disobedient. Because when the Lord showed that to me, it was like, you have seen the beauty of my church in a sense. Imagine what you would experience if you came home. And I didn't want to miss that, right? So I went back to my seat, and Steve gets up and he gives this incredible talk about how the early church was willing to die rather than pinch incense to the pagan gods. And I'm sitting here going, I'm worried about a job. So he finishes, and Greg's like, grabs me and he goes, come on, Keith, we're going to go talk to him. And I'm like, no, we're not doing that. He's like, let's go. Greg's he doesn't care. Yeah. So he goes up and he grabs Steve and he goes, Steve, this is Keith Nestor. He's a Protestant pastor thinking about becoming Catholic. Would you give him your cell phone number? And I'm like, you don't do that, right? So Steve looks at me and he goes, brother, he goes, I know exactly where you are. He goes, I'm going to give you one piece of advice. He goes, you either need to become Catholic right now, or you need to turn around and run away and never look back.
Wow.
And
you're like, I tried that.
Exactly. I that's exactly what I thought. I'm like, I've been there, done that, and it sucks. So I need to do this. And he did. He gave me his cell phone, gave me his book. On the way home, I told Greg, I said, that's it, man, I'm doing this. And Greg said to me, like Devin had all those years ago, he said, Keith, whatever you need, I'll be there for you. And I knew he meant it. And when I got home, I told Stell, I said, look, I have to do this. I have to become Catholic. And there was a part of me that was afraid she was going to freak out, but there was another part of me that was like, no, she's going to be okay. And she said to me, Keith, I'm so proud of you.
Wow. What was that? Just got a wave of emotion. Keep going. Bless your wife. What a good woman.
She said, I'm so proud of you. I know I've watched you wrestle with this. I've watched you seek the Lord. And that's all I've ever wanted out of a husband, is one who seeks the Lord. And I've never seen you more focused on seeking the Lord than I've seen you in this. So if that's where he's leading you, then I'm with you 100%. She's like, I don't know what it means for me, but I'm with you because you're my husband.
I love good wives.
she's the best. Woman. She's the best. Now, I mentioned earlier what it was like for her personally, that she really suffered. Yeah. And she really struggled through that. That wasn't an easy thing for her, Matt. Yeah. She didn't go, okay, great. Now, because
you can make a decision and the emotions don't have to follow immediately, right? It's just not like she didn't continue to wrestle with it after.
Well, especially when I walked in the next day and quit my job and now we lose 70% of our income, if not more.
God bless you.
And it was like, okay, we're really doing this. And I remember going in and telling my church, telling Pastor Mike, who's my friend to this day, like, I got to do this. And he's just like, I don't get it. I don't understand why, what? And my last Sunday there was the Sunday that we put shovels in the ground for the new building that I had helped design, that I'd helped raise money for, that I was a part of. And it was like all of this excitement over this new thing. We're going to be the new mega church in town. And, some of that was built on what I was going to do there. And now I'm putting a shovel. They didn't even give me a shovel, but I'm there, and I'm like, I literally went from the newest church in town to the oldest church in town the next week. So I went after that. And
how did your head pastor respond?
He was sad.
Yeah.
He was like, I remember he said to me, and this is when he's a pretty manly guy. Like, he's got a lot of machismo to him, and like, he's always in control. He's always in command, you know. And I saw him kind of crack emotionally because he's like, when I brought you here, I was there 6 years. He's like, but I've known him for like 20. And he's like, when I brought you here, you know, I knew that he wanted me to be the successor because he's nearing retirement, and he was grooming me to like take over the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And he goes, I never saw it ending this way. I just remember him saying that. I didn't see it ending this way, Keith.
And when you told him you were becoming Catholic, you didn't give him any sort of reason to think you weren't 100% convinced. He knew you had made this decision.
Yeah, he knew.
Yeah.
He said to me at one point in time, he goes, you know, I almost thought about trying to argue, but he had known me well enough to know that when I had made up my decision about this, that I wasn't going to be argued out of it.
Yeah.
I had another pastor friend of mine in town who was trying to argue me out of it, and we would meet weekly, and he would show me things, and he would tell me to read books, and we would meet, and he would try to convince me that I shouldn't do it, and it just didn't go anywhere. Like there was no stopping it, because at that point in time, I'd already done the whole objection, argument, answered thing, and what I've learned is this. Here's the deal: if all of our apologetic is just bullet points and talking points, that's never gonna. That's a very significant piece of the puzzle, but it's certainly not everything. There comes a point in time where you have to move beyond the intellectual, rational argumentation part and move into what's going on in your heart. And that's where I think the Blessed Mother has a very important role to play in things. At least she did for me, because it moved from now I worried about. So I stopped reading apologetic stuff. I'm just like, I don't need that anymore. I believe, like my priest told me, he said, you need to believe two things are true. You need to believe that the Pope is the successor to St. Peter and has been given the authority by Jesus to shepherd his church. And you need to believe in the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. If you believe those two things, the rest of it will all fall into play. And there were some things I struggled with doctrinally, even through this.
Yeah, that's important to point out.
That I didn't feel like I had to solve every equation.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes people get hung up on that, and they go,
if I don't feel 100% convicted on every doctrine, what would your advice be to someone like that?
My advice would be, stop thinking about it as a math equation, okay? It's not a math equation. If you have to think about it in a bigger way than that. And if you believe that the Pope is the successor to Peter, and you believe Jesus Christ is truly present in the Eucharist, then it's okay if you struggle in those other things, as long as you are willing to be obedient.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that you become Catholic and you go, well, I don't believe that. I don't believe that. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that you submit even your lack of having all of that worked out. There's probably a better word for that right now.
No, that's all right.
I think you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And again, that all boils down to what's required of you in order to be a good Catholic. And one of the things that's so intriguing to me about Catholicism is that you have some Catholics that are brilliant scholars, okay? St. Thomas Aquinas, all these guys. And then you have millions of people who were peasants, who didn't know even how to read.
Yeah.
And we have saints like that too. You don't have to have it all. It's not a mathematic equation to be solved. It's not, it's not like that. It's what's God doing in your heart, you know? But both of those things are present there. And I think that people learned with me that, no, Keith's mind's made up. He's not turning back. And once I wasn't afraid to lose everything, then there was really no turning back. Because that was the other thing people kept saying to me, what are you going to do for a job? How are you going to feed your family? What about your ministry? What about this? What about health insurance? What about all that? Because that's, unfortunately,
yeah, I've been there too.
Things that people put before obedience to Christ. And once I got to the point where I'm like, I don't know, who cares? I'm doing this. The only thing that matters to me is following Jesus into his church. And once I get there, he'll let me know what to do next. And it wasn't a thing where I thought, well, okay, I'll do this and then God's going to pay me back. It was, I'll do this if I have to be the lowliest guy in the world in terms of a job and be dirt poor, that's okay. And one of the things I tell everybody that are thinking about converting to Catholicism, I tell them this, look, unless you're willing to lose everything and to be nothing compared to this world, you're not ready to become Catholic, because that could be required of you. Are you going to do it anyway? Because so much of what happens in North American Protestant Christianity is do the right things will happen to you. Do good things, it'll work out. Serve the Lord, he'll give you the desires of your heart. We have all these Bible verses we can strap onto that, right? And what I'm here to tell people is that's all got its context and its time and place, and God's the good giver of gifts and all of that. And he wants you to have life abundantly, but it's his definition, not yours. And you've got to be willing to leave that to him. And even if you lose everything, I mean, what did Jesus say? Whoever seeks to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses life for my sake will find it. I mean, he doesn't make it complicated. It's simple, but it's not easy. But we all want it to make sense, and we all want to be able to follow Jesus into whatever we want. And it doesn't work that way. And you're going to be a miserable Catholic if you go into Catholicism with your own agenda and your own conditions. You won't make it. That's why I think a lot of people don't last as Catholics, because they've got all of this other stuff that has to be put in front of it. And Jesus doesn't work that way.
What was the RCIA process like?
Didn't do it.
I wouldn't think you'd have to.
Well, I did my own little thing with Father Chris. So when I came to him...
What's his last name?
Podasky.
Okay.
Father Christopher
I don't know
Podasky.
If I've met him.
Oh, man. You would love him. He's amazing. He's an incredible guy. And I mean, I'm spoiled. I've the priest that... He's not our priest anymore. He was moved. But the priests that I've been in my life have been godly, holy, wonderful, helpful men. And I know not everybody has that situation, but I have been abundantly blessed in my life with that. And he basically walked us through this whole process.
You and your wife at the
Me
same
and my
time?
wife, because we got our marriage done in the church. He says, we're going to do that. He walked me through my first confession. He walked me through all of it, leaving my job, everything, like all of that. He was there. And I said to him, so what do I have to do? Do I have to this was in the spring. I'm like, I guess I have to wait until the fall to take your class, right? He's like, nope. He goes, I don't think we're going to do that with you. He said, we'll just meet together, weekly, and we'll talk about things. We'll pray. And I remember I came to him after maybe 3 months of that saying, when do I get to become Catholic? I'm kind of serious about this. I mean, I already quit my job. I'm like, ready to do this. And he goes, just pick a day. So I said, okay. So we picked the day of October 8th.
Yes, I knew you were going to say that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we picked October 8th, not because it's some big saint feast day or whatever. It was just a random day. October 8th comes, and our church was being renovated, so we're in the basement. And I go up to get my sacraments and make my confirmation. And, it was awesome. I go back to my seat. I'm in the front row. And when it's time to, share the peace or whatever, I feel this tap on my shoulder. And I turn around, and Steve Ray's standing there.
Stop it.
Yeah. He was in town.
No.
Obviously at that parish, but he was in town giving a talk. I knew he was in town, but I didn't know he was going to be at that parish or at that mass. We have a huge parish with lots of masses. And he was standing right behind me the whole time. I didn't even know it. And he tapped me on the shoulder. And I don't think he even remembers. I've talked to him several times since then, and I still don't know if he puts it together.
Yeah.
But he goes, welcome home, brother. You'll never look back.
How funny.
And I was like, dude, are you kidding me? I remember looking at Jesus. I was just like, are you kidding me right now? How amazing is this?
How funny, because the thing he said to you was either become Catholic now or run and never look back. And now he's saying, maybe not even remembering that initial encounter, you'll never look back.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was October 8th, 2017. And then the following year was that first day we were in Medjugorje,
So tell me, what was it like going to confession?
Oh, man, I was terrified. Man. Which I think most people experience that. So I was worried because I'm a human being and I want people to like me. And I loved this priest. Yeah. And I was terrified that if
this could ruin our friendship.
Exactly. All the dumb things that we all think. They're not dumb. Yeah. I shouldn't say that.
But they're understandable.
The things that we think. And I remember feeling very terrified about it and scared because, I've got a past. I've got a lot of darkness. I've got a lot of skeletons. I've got a lot of things I'm not proud of. And I didn't want to I worked really hard to rehabilitate myself and come through all these things and those are things that are deep in my past, and it's like, okay, I don't want to go back there, and if I do this, he's going to look at me like I'm some kind of horrible person or what. I'm sure everybody thinks that.
Yeah.
And I remember it was the 4th of July. It was Independence Day, And we were sitting across from each other, and he's like, "How you doing, Keith?" And I said, "Well, I'm really nervous about confession." We hadn't scheduled it or anything. I said, "I know I need to do that, and I know all the theology behind it. I believe it 100%. But I said, just on a personal level, I'm nervous about it because I want you to like me. And I'm afraid that I'm ashamed, and so I don't really know where to go with it." And he goes, I think I know what to do. And I said, "What's that?" And he just goes, "In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, amen." And I said, "I'm not ready." He says, "You're ready."
You'd been reflecting on what you would confess.
Yeah.
You were prepared.
I was prepared, but not all the way. Okay? Because here's the thing. Sometimes I think it's important for us to prepare to make a confession, but sometimes we need to be caught off guard in confession. And what I mean by that is this. If we over-prepare, then we start to over-rationalize and over-explain away things that we should confess that we don't.
I see.
Because we might go, "Well, yeah, I did this, but, I was really upset," or this or that.
Yeah.
I guess I don't need to confess that. Whereas if we're just in the spot reacting with what the Lord's doing in our hearts and the Holy Spirit's convicting us on, or maybe our priest is prodding from us, then we don't have time to create the explanation or to create the excuse or to not even mention it. Mm-hmm. So I'd sort of like made categories in my mind of things, but he walked me through it. He knew I didn't know how to do it.
Yeah.
So he didn't just sit there and go, "All right, let's go." He said, "Here's how you do this." And then he very gently and lovingly began to ask me questions and draw things out of me and help me to be able to say what I needed to say. And it was absolutely beautiful, Independence Day.
Yeah.
And I remember walking out of there, and I know it's cliche, I know people say it all the time, but I literally felt a weight off my chest. I literally felt lighter. I felt like the sun was brighter. The colors were more vivid. I mean, it was like people talking about a near-death experience. That's kind of like confession to me, because I think that was really, I don't want to say the last, but one of the devil's strongest strongholds in my heart at the moment to try to short circuit me was, throwing my sins of my past at me and saying, you can't mention this, you can't say, and it was like that disappeared. That was taken away. And it was like the Lord said, "Look, this is what this is for." So to me, like, it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful.
Now, you've been Catholic for 9 years or so, 8 years? Or?
6 years, 6 or 7. What, it was 2017?
Yeah.
So
you've become somewhat prominent on YouTube. You've got a great YouTube channel. Have you had former, Protestant youth who were part of your group reach out to you or hear about you or try to challenge you? Or?
Oh, man. Yeah. It's been amazing. Like, there have been people from each of the churches I've served in the past that have become Catholic.
Okay.
And it's been beautiful to see. There's a young man I'm helping right now who's a friend of my son's, who was in my youth group at the last church and was he was sort of on the fringes of even that. And I don't really think he ever got faith. And, I just kind of was gone. But I'd see him around my son here and there. And my son says, "Hey, Dad," and my kids still aren't Catholic, but my son said to me, he's like, "Hey, Dad, Ryan watches your videos. Would you be willing to talk to him?" And I'm like, "Seriously, he does?"
This is your son's friend who's part of your youth group.
Mm-hmm. And I'm like, "Sure." So I met with this young man. He's like 24. And he was telling me his story, how he became an atheist and all this. But he was raised Catholic, had no faith, and then started watching videos on my channel.
Yeah.
And it just all clicked for him. And this was a kid who was into all kinds of stuff. And it just all clicked for him. And he was like, "So what do I do?" And we're sitting at like a coffee
you become
shop.
Catholic,
I'm
or
like,
you turn around and never look back?
And I'm like, well, and that's a dangerous question to ask. I'm like, well, let's go make an appointment to go talk with our priest. Are you cool with that? He's like, yeah. So I took him to daily mass. We met with the priest, and now he's like on his way.
Glory to God.
That's like real time happening right now.
Wow.
So yeah, that's happened.
If you don't mind me asking you a rather personal question, what's it like your children not being Catholic, you said?
Oh, man, that's been a struggle, because at first, when I left the church, they didn't know what to do. They were like 15, 17, and 18. Father Chris told me, "Look, you can't just make them be Catholic. They're too old. You can't just announce to them, 'Hey, you guys are Catholic now.'"
Yeah.
So But when I left the church, they were like, well, what are we all doing? Like, we go to church as a family. We have to go to this other church now. I'm like, well, why don't you guys just try it? So they came to Mass for a few weeks, and they just were not getting it. They were like, we don't like this.
Did that break your heart?
It broke my heart for a lot of reasons. It didn't make me angry at them because I knew that they just didn't get it. And I told them, they're like, do we have to do this? And I'm like, no, you don't have to do this. So they kind of went back to their environments. My daughter ended up moving away, and my sons, they're all out of the house now. But it's been hard because, like, my daughter's very strong in her faith. She's a worship leader in a Protestant church, but she was very upset about everything because in her view, she said, are you telling me that everything you've ever taught us is a lie? And I said, no, that's not what I'm telling you, but here's, and in the beginning, I was getting a lot of pushback from people. So I was becoming pretty defensive, and I sometimes spoke to them in ways that were overly defensive, which made them feel alienated and made it tougher for them. My sons were kind of just like, we don't care, whatever, but my daughter especially, she really struggled with that for a little while. So she kind of bounced around. So it's a lot better now. They're older. And one thing that was really cool with my daughter was maybe a year after my book came out. And when I say came out, I mean self-published. It was no big deal. But she made a post. She made a post on Facebook with the cover of my book, and I thought, oh no, what's this going to say? And she said, many of you have wondered what happened to my dad and why he did what he did. If you really want to know what's going on with my dad, you need to read this book. She's like, I'm not Catholic, but I can tell you guys this: I've never seen my dad more in love with Jesus than I've ever seen him in my entire life. So if this is what Catholicism does, then maybe you guys should give it a chance, or something like, it was something like that. It broke my heart in a good way. Like I was blown away. So I have, it's a fine line I have to walk. I've had talks with them where they've revealed to me, hey, we don't like when you say things to us that make us feel like you're upset that we're not Catholic. And I'm like, but I am. They're like, well, it makes us feel like you're not proud of us or that you don't approve of us. So it's a hard line to walk. And then, my ministry is pretty public in terms of, like, I'm pretty transparent about my family, especially with our Rosary Crew stuff. So people know my kids. So sometimes the people in our Rosary Crew are so kind to my kids.
Thank God.
Which is amazing. They're so encouraging and kind to them, which really, really helps, So the people that I've let my kids meet that are Catholics, I kind of have a little screening process. I'm like, okay, you can meet them, but not them. And
you remember this is what happened to Cameron Bertuzzi after I interviewed him. Not only did he, but his wife started getting unsolicited messages from people telling her to become Catholic, saying things quite aggressively.
So I made a video for I've never met Cameron, I've never talked to him, but I made a video called Keith's Unsolicited Advice to Cameron Bertuzzi. Nice. And it was basically like, don't worry about what other people are telling you. You get to be in charge of you here, and what I didn't say, because I didn't know about that at the time, was you absolutely have to shield your wife from that. Now my kids, I've sort of shielded them already, so they've only received good things in that regard that I know about. So I have hope, but it's a fine line, because I want them to know that I want them to become Catholic, but I don't want them to feel like I'm disappointed in them or disapprove of them.
I was chatting. Does
that make sense?
It does a lot, and I'm going to come up with a bit of an analogy here that's might be a bit clunky, but I was sitting across this table from Kim Zemba, who lived a homosexual lifestyle and then became a Christian and now lives a celibate life. Beautiful woman. And I asked her, what's your advice for parents with people in the lifestyle? Now, I am not comparing people with, homosexual lifestyle to people who are Protestants, at all. Don't hear me say that. But I think the advice she gave me it might be kind of similar to the advice you might give. She's saying to parents with people with same-sex attraction, they already know, presumably, right, where you stand, you've made it. So what they really need now isn't for you to keep reminding them every conversation, but just to have a holistic interest in their life and to journey with them and to love them. And I imagine something similar. It's not like your kids aren't aware of this. You don't have to say it probably ever again. but you can pray with them, you can love them, you can be show them how you're proud of them and things like that.
And that's the thing. Like I want them. They know, and I'm confident that they know. And I've had really good conversations with them in the last year has been a lot better. My daughter's married now. Like my kids are adults. They've moved out. My youngest son lives in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and there's a beautiful cathedral there. And whenever we go visit him, he will go with us to daily mass. Like I'm saying, hey, will you come with us? And at one point in time, I was being a dad and giving him a hard time for not going to church enough. And he said, I went to the cathedral once by myself. And I'm like, you did? What? I was so excited. But then a couple of weeks ago, he was, so my youngest son, Drew, he's an American Ninja Warrior, right? Like he's been on the show and everything.
Cool.
And he works at a ninja gym in Sioux Falls, and he FaceTimed me with a bunch of his buddies. And they were like, I'm like, hey. And they're like, we were just watching your channel. We were watching your videos, man. We love it. That's awesome. And I said, are you guys Catholic? And the one guy was like, yeah. He goes, I don't really go to mass. And I said, all right, here's the deal. I want all of you guys to go to mass this Sunday and then go to this. There's a really good donut shop. I said, you go there and I'll buy you all donuts. So you guys need to go this weekend.
Not beyond bribing.
I'm not beyond it. I'll do it. And they did. They went. Wow. I was so excited. So I feel like God's given me little glimpses of light, but I'm trying to at the same time leave that in his hands. And I've, this is going to sound kind of like super cheesy Catholic-y, but like I have given them to the Blessed Mother. I really have done that. I've said, look, I can't do this. And I know that I can't do it. So I don't put that pressure on myself anymore. At first I did. So I'm not like, all right, I'm scheming how to make my kids Catholic. And this is what I tell everybody. The best thing that you can do to help your non-Catholic family and friends become Catholic is for you to model Catholicism with joy, devotion, and excitement. If being Catholic has made you a better Christian and they see that, that's going to intrigue them. Not, well, hey, did you hear what this person said? Or did you know about this? Or what about the 36,000 denominations or whatever number we've made up today? Let them see how Catholicism has made you more in love with Jesus. That's going to open way more doors than, well, Keith, what book should I give them?
Yeah.
I get asked that question. What book should I get? Sometimes I'm like, why would you give them a book? Did they ask for a book? If they didn't ask you for a book, why would you give them a book? Yeah. Like, why we arbitrarily think that people are going to read these books that we give them about something that they're not interested in. Yeah. Like if somebody gave me a book about, the laws of thermodynamics, I'd be like, thanks. Yeah. I'm not reading that.
That's a good point. There's a saying, he who is convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. Yeah, so you can argue someone into submission, but if it's really, they don't have the arguments to come back at you, but they're not really convinced, well, they're not convinced.
Yeah. So it's about what are you inviting them into? Are you inviting them into the best argument? Or are you inviting them into something beautiful, the treasure that Jesus talks about that's hidden in a field, that once we sell all we have, I talk about this a lot in my talks, like once we sell all we have that field, we still have to go get the treasure. There's work involved. That's good. Right? It's not just sitting on the top of the field, right? You got to dig. And when people see you digging for that, and then when they see you opening it and going through it and going, wow, did you know about this? That's what I feel like. Every day I feel like as a Catholic, I feel like I find a new piece of the treasure. And I'm like, dude, this is awesome. Did you know about this? Did you know about that? Yep. But when you first become Catholic, a lot of people just go, well, that's it. You're done. Yeah. No, we're still continuing to grow. And if people who are outside of Catholicism see us in our joy and excitement and devotion, then that's going to intrigue them. But the problem is a lot of us, we're not that excited, or we're not that joyful, or we're not that devoted. And the world picks those things apart one by one. Doesn't matter what you have. If someone's raving about something and people are like, yeah, but you're going to tell me about the restaurant that you love so much. When's the last time you went there? Yeah. Things like that. They've got to see it working in our lives. To me, that has the potential to open up these doors. Then when you get in those conversations, now you can say, well, hey, if you'd like to talk about more or you want to see things, now they're there. Yeah.
Well, I want to say thank you to Hallow, which is the best, not just the best Catholic app on the App Store, any app store, it's the best app out of any app that's ever existed, Catholic or otherwise. I think it's finally time to say that. If you want to grow in your prayer life, please check out hallow.com/Matt. If you sign up on their website at hallow.com/Matt, you can get the entire app for free for 90 days. That's ridiculous. After those 90 days, if you don't agree with me that it's worth the money that you're going to get charged after that monthly, which is a relatively small amount, you can just cancel. You won't be charged a cent. They have sleep stories. They have My Catholic Lo-Fi on there. They've just added the Gospels, a dramatized version of the Gospels. They have daily exegesis on Mass readings, which you can listen to. It is fantastic. So if you haven't done it already, hallow.com/Matt. Sign up over there. Try it for free for 3 months. Keith Nestor, thank you so much for sharing that story.
Matt, it's an honor to be here with you. I really appreciate it.
It's amazing how people's stories really help because they're vulnerable. You know, they're not answers to problems. They're just like bringing people along a journey. And that's where I think conversion really happens, you know. So,
amen.
We have a ton of questions from our local supporters that I want to get to here. Benjamin asks, other than covering our cars in pints with Aquinas stickers, could you mention 1 or 2 actions that we can do as Catholics that seem to have a bigger positive influence on those witnessing our lives, like viewing our lives? Yeah.
Huh. Well, I think going to daily mass as much as you can, because everyone asks you, what are you doing today? You know, if you're daily living out the faith daily in front of people is a great way to do that. So it's going to motivate you to do that. So if you know someone's going through something, hey, when I pray tonight, I'll pray for you. Or what do you got going on? Oh, sure, we can hang out. I'm going to go to mass first, you know, or whatever. So if we just live out our daily Catholic lives in front of people, we don't have to always wear T-shirts and you know, put a bumper sticker on our car.
One thing I've started doing is if I see somebody studying the Bible in a coffee shop, or if I see someone with a cross around their neck, I'll always say, hey, glory to Jesus Christ.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. You know, because, I mean, we live in not a Christian day and age, and you see someone with a cross around the neck, good chance they're Christian. But I do think it's in a way, it's more difficult to kind of just strike up a conversation today because relationships have just broken down on every level. With the internet, after COVID, things like that, it's difficult just to chat with someone on an airplane or chat with someone in a grocery line.
Now, for me and for you, it's probably a little bit easier in the sense that if someone says, well, what do you do for work or whatever, you can share that. Yeah. So what if you don't do anything like professionally in ministry? What you can say is this. Yeah, I'm a banker and I'm really involved in my church.
Yeah.
So always add that tagline to whatever you say about your life. You know, what do you do? Oh, I sell insurance and I'm really active in my local parish. Oh, okay. Just find ways to share what you're doing with people every day, which means you got to be doing it.
S. Lordy says, I come from a non-denominational and Southern Baptist background with an emphasis on the demonic, almost deliverance that was taught since a young age. Catholicism has brought so much peace, but I still struggle with thinking mostly every nightmare or bump in the night is demonic. It's embarrassing. I'm 37, but it's been ingrained in me since I was 8 years old. Any advice?
Yeah, my advice is to pray the Rosary. You know, there are lots of Catholic devotions that you can pick from. That's my favorite one. But the St. Michael prayer, if you make a habit of praying every night, maybe it's night prayer, you're going to pray the Divine Office, whatever you're going to do. The Catholic Church is like so stinking cool when it comes to things like spiritual warfare, and it just feels like you're in an adventure. And invoke those things, bring those things as part of your daily life. Meditate on lives of the saints that have had incredible spiritual warfare exercises, and pray to your guardian angel. That's the thing. In your non-denominational background, you're on your own, right? Now you say, well, I have Jesus. Okay, great. But in the Catholic understanding, you've also got the angels and saints around you that, as the book of Hebrews tells us, are a cloud of witnesses that surround us. So ask for the intercession of the saints to help you.
And it sounds like this person thinks they might have an overemphasis on this. And so I would say even in that situation, our Blessed Mother is aware of that and can help heal you of this.
Amen.
There's that classic line from C.S. Lewis who says the devil is equally pleased with somebody who thinks the devil's under a rock, under every rock, and someone who thinks he doesn't exist. Yeah. Maybe meditating on the power of Christ and how one way I like to talk to my children, I'm like, Jesus compared to Satan. it's like if you put a hungry lion in the cage with a sheep. Who would win? You know, like just to kind of help them realize it's not like Satan's the opposite of Christ. As far as power goes. Okay. TK is Tradish. What's up? She says, did any parishioners from your church get interested in the Catholic Church? And you've talked about this, but feel free to go back at it. After you preached your Catholic but not Catholic Bible series?
No, because they had no idea. I didn't, I didn't frame that as, hey, this is Catholic stuff. So they just were like, cool, the Bible's awesome.
Yeah.
Which I think is a good reaction.
It is, even if that's all it was, but it may have planted a seed so that when they encounter a Catholic, imagine the Protestant saying, well, I'm not a Catholic, but did you know that Mary's the new Eve?
And I think that was kind of an important part of that when I did convert. I think some people remembered some of those things.
Let's see here. Danya says, believing in the intercession to saints and the rosary were my most difficult struggles in my conversion to Catholicism. How did you deal with it? Especially as somebody who has a daily YouTube video coming out. How did you overcome that obstacle?
I never had a problem with that, to be honest with you.
That's refreshing to hear.
Yeah. To me, like, I saw the intercession of the saints in the Bible before I was Catholic. So I didn't really have this aversion to it. It's been something that for me has helped me practically, like in my life, with doing the daily rosary and how that's worked out. Like I can't even explain the change in my life that's taken place since I've done that, just on a personal level. So for me, I don't just do these things because you're supposed to do them. Like, it's sort of the air I breathe now, and it's become so life-giving to me. So I didn't have that issue where, well, I don't think you can only pray. Part of the problem is, most people don't understand the differences in language, the way we talk about things. This is something I talk about in my book, how things mean one thing in Catholic world and a different thing in Protestant world. And prayer is one of those things. Yeah. And that's one of the objections that all these Protestants are always having. You can't only pray to God. Why did you pray to Mary? And what we're always telling them is we're asking for their intercession.
Right. Prayer doesn't necessarily mean worship in a Catholic understanding.
Exactly. Yeah. But that's not a category that they have when it comes to prayer. So sometimes we have to really dig into those objections and recognize that we probably are closer in our belief. We just talk about things differently.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually did a debate with Cameron Bertuzzi. It was a very cordial, friendly debate on YouTube about the intercession of the saints that might interest people out there if they want to look that up. Tell me some stories from, you've been, by the way, kudos to you for the effort and the endurance in doing this rosary thing every day. Well, so am I right in thinking you were doing it on your main channel and then you split it off?
I did. So again, this was never part of my plan. This was never part of my agenda. When I started doing this Catholic ministry stuff, which again, I never said I'm going to do that. It just kind of happened. But right before the pandemic is when I was basically going to go all in on doing ministry again. I had a bunch of talks booked. The book was coming out. I was doing like the journey home and all these different things. So I'm like, okay, I'm starting to have I'm running out of like days I can take off work to go do ministry things. Maybe I'll just jump in and do this. Well, then the pandemic hit and everything just went to vapor, as everybody knows. I was coming out of Mass on March 17th. And I just went home and did a live stream on YouTube on my regular channel. And someone on there said, hey, can we pray the rosary tomorrow on your YouTube channel? And I thought, well, I've never led the rosary before. I was praying it, but I'd never led it before because I was super intimidated to do it. I'm like, I will mess this up. I will do something wrong. And I'm completely unqualified to be a rosary leader, right? But I thought, I can do this. If it's at a computer, I can have it. I can read it. I'll be set. So the next day we went on March 18th, 2020, and we did the live stream, and a bunch of people showed up on this channel. And then it was kind of like, well, hey, can we do this again? Yeah. So I thought, okay, we'll do this for 14 days because that was all the pandemic was going to last. If you remember that 14 days to slow the spread. I'm like, I can do this for 14 days. No problem. Well, long story short, it's never stopped. And eventually it got to a point where like my entire YouTube channel became just overrun with these rosary live streams. And I've never been that savvy of a YouTuber, but I do pay attention to what YouTube likes and doesn't like. And I'm noticing things and whatever. And I thought to myself, okay, I sort of have these parallel ministries going here. One hand is like talks and sort of like little lessons about Catholic things and Bible studies. And then this other thing is this daily rosary. I need to make these two separate worlds. So about a year ago, maybe a little bit more than that, we just made its own YouTube channel. And so now I have the Rosary Crew, which is what we call that community, which is worldwide. We've got over 80 countries of people that pray every day, thousands of people. We're on a bunch of different YouTube channels and Facebook pages. Well, only one YouTube channel now, but we're on a bunch of different Facebook pages, and people pray from morning to night on the Rosary page. And it's become this incredible community that has really like become our family.
Yeah, please link to that Thursday in the YouTube.
Rosary Crew with Keith Nestor is the Rosary channel. There's a 24/7 looping rosary on there. So I have recordings, like I've got a Our Lady of Sorrows rosary, I've got a Divine Mercy chaplet, I've got a Latin rosary, I've got a bunch of different rosaries on there. Yeah. But then we have the daily live stream and then the 24/7 looping through.
So what's it like when you miss a day?
I've never missed a day.
Never? Nope. Never been too sick? Or
there was one day when I was so sick that I couldn't talk, but I was still there, and I had a young man come up on the side of the screen with me, and we prayed together, but I was going like this.
Wow.
But I've never missed a day in almost 4 years. And even when we travel, we do these pilgrimages, it's just when I'm traveling, which is a lot, people know, okay, the time might be different. I try to do it at the same time every day, but when we travel, it's different. And then, we now we have this thing where we travel around the country to pray with these people. Okay. Can I tell you about this?
Tell me.
Okay. So the job that I did after I quit my job in the ministry was I went into photography. So my wife and I had a photography business that she's been doing that forever. And we had our own business. And it was kind of like that. We bought a building downtown, renovated it, made it awesome. And so I went to work in the business full time after I quit the church. And when I started going and doing ministry stuff, I had to step away from photography. And Estelle was like, I don't want to do this anymore. Let's just sell the building. So that was supposed to be our retirement, right? So we were trying to figure out what we were going to do. We sold the building in 2021. And we were shoveling snow one night. I remember this. And Estelle said to me, she's like, what do you think we ought to do with that money from selling the building? I'm like, well, isn't that like for retirement? Because, I had no money at this time. And she says, well, do you want to just leave it sitting in the bank, or do you want to do something for God with it? And I'm like,
that's an unfair question.
I know. I'm like, okay, come on. I'm like, what are we doing? And her and I, we would geek out on YouTube watching like these VanLifers drive around in their little van motorhomes and think, oh, wouldn't that be a cool life? These kids are like 20 and they're driving around living in a van. And so we'd always fantasized about having like a Sprinter RV and being able to travel. And right around this time, one of our friends in the Rosary Crew who lives in Canada sent me an email, and she said, Keith, I had a dream that you came to visit me to do the rosary. And I'm like, how would I ever do that? Okay, that's it. And I remember thinking about that when Estelle said that. I'm like, wouldn't it be cool if we bought a motorhome and we traveled around instead of getting on an airplane and flying to a speaking event, which I do, instead of doing that, now what we do is we look to see where it is. We have a map of our, what we call Rosary Road Captains, people that have said, hey, I want you to come and pray with me. And then we just make like a little tour of where we're going to go. And so then we'll say, okay, like in February, we went to Texas for a month. And we looked at the map and we just kind of said, okay, here's the days, here's where we're going to be. And people say, hey, I'm in Kansas City, I'm in Tulsa, I'm in Dallas, I'm in Houston. And then we just travel from city to city in the RV. And then when we show up, they have gathered some people together to pray the rosary. And then that's our daily live stream. So it might be like, hey, today we're in Steubenville with Matt and Thursday. Let's pray the rosary. And it's crazy because like last Sunday, somebody came to my parish. On Sundays, I do the rosary at my parish because I want to be able to talk to people in the morning. So I just said, well, why don't I just pray the rosary here? And there was a young couple who are engaged to be married on their way from Las Vegas to Michigan who did a detour to come to Cedar Rapids to our parish to pray the rosary with us. So I'm in the middle. I'm in a closet in my church, and these two walk in. They're like, hi, we're here to pray with you. We've been praying with you for 2.5 years on YouTube. And so here we are.
What a gift.
So that's what we do. Like, we're getting ready to go to California for a month, and we just love it. So my wife and I and our little dog, we'll just hop in the van and we'll drive around, and it's been a blast. So I never would have picked that for ministry. I never would have said that's what I want to do, but I think Our Lady picked that, and it's been a total honor to be a part of that.
Praise the Lord. That's really fantastic. And I don't want to give any details away, but we encountered a person this morning. We just bumped into them, and they said that I don't want to give too much away. So what should we say? Oh,
yeah. This person had a really challenging time in life with a family member, and the Rosary Crew was a big part of that. And he was just so excited. And when he heard I was coming here, he reached out to me and said, "Hey, come and say hi." And then completely randomly, Matt decided to go stop in for water at that place, and the guy was there. It was like, I'm sure it was total coincidence.
Well, exactly. Lucy says, "Hi, I follow the Rosary Crew. Thank you." Cool.
Hey, Lucy, how you doing?
I wanted to talk to you about locals because you asked me about that earlier.
Yes, tell me about locals, Matt.
This sounded like an ad setup. It really wasn't.
Hello there.
Because
tell me about locals.
You're currently on Patreon.
I am on Patreon, yes.
How long you been on Patreon for?
Oh, man, probably 3 years.
Yeah. So when I started Pints of the Aquinas, when I quit my job and we were like, all right, we need to really try to make this work. Went to Patreon, was happy with Patreon. And then Patreon started banning people because they didn't fit the kind of woke doctrine, as it were, didn't full step in line with it. And so that made me nervous, and I was looking at some other ways to bring in money. I was saying, okay, maybe I'll start something on my website. Babylon B does something like that.
Yeah.
So you give to Babylon B and you start getting access to everything on the site. So I came up with this WordPress plugin, spent a lot of money kind of refining it, tried to do that, but it's so difficult, to create essentially a Patreon. It takes a lot of work. And then I had the fellas at Locals reach out to me. So Locals was started by Dave Rubin and a few folks after they started banning people. They got
canceled too.
Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin had the cojones to quit. They weren't even kicked off. They just decided to quit because they didn't want to be part of some group that was, limiting speech. So they reached out to me and they asked me if I'd come over. And I wasn't interested in doing it because I thought it would just confuse everybody. I already have this community over on Patreon. If I start talking about this other thing, it's too complicated. And besides, I didn't know these people at Locals, so I didn't trust them. I just figured they were trying to get my business. So I was like, no, thank you very much. Well, they were quite persistent, and I was shocked that they were just like really kind people. They were like, well, look, we can help you set it up. We think you'd do really well with it. Okay, so I started looking into it. The more I looked into it, the more I was convinced it's the way to go. And way better than Patreon. I'm not telling you to switch because, again, maybe that's too complicated, but for me, it was definitely the right decision. So a couple of things about Locals that Patreon doesn't do. One, they don't ban you unless you're involved in like public criminal activity. Secondly, even if they did ban you, it's not Locals who's paying you, it's Stripe who's paying you.
Okay.
And so they take, I think it's 10% of the money you're bringing in, but if you leave Locals, or if they ban you, which they won't, you just get more money from Stripe. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
They want creators to be independent. So they don't want you to have to rely on them forever in the way you have to rely on Patreon because there's no way to get out of it. Sure, if you quit Patreon, you could download the HTML list of all the emails and hope that they'll all get the email. But I just thought that was really cool that they did that. The other thing I like about Locals is it's much more integrated than Patreon is. So on Patreon, you have to record, say, an unlisted video on YouTube and then link to it.
Yes.
Whereas on Locals, you just stream directly.
That was my question. I was going to ask you that. Because I like to do Zoom calls with my patrons, but it would be awesome to be able to do a Locals whatever live stream. Like on Patreon, I can't do that. I have to record a video, put it on YouTube.
Yeah.
I think you can upload a video now directly to Patreon.
Okay.
I think,
but can you stream to it?
You can't stream to it.
So they have that option. The other thing I love about Locals is basically everything we post over there, people can go and check out. So I do these morning streams in the morning, and anyone can watch them. But if you want to comment, you have to be a Local supporter.
Okay.
And what that does is it makes Locals basically the real social media as far as I'm concerned. When I think of Locals, and people who support me on Locals say the same thing, they're like, this is what social media should have been. Like it's actually social. People aren't paying $10 a month to be a jerk to each other and to you. They're invested.
Yeah.
And the other thing I love about Locals, and I'll finish with this, is whereas on Patreon, it feels like you're the one who has to drive all of the excitement. Like you put up posts, people respond. You put up posts, people respond. On Locals, everyone's posting and everyone's responding to everyone's post. And so when I post, I can say, okay, I'm going to send this to everybody's email. My post gets prominence because people are usually there to see the sort of things that I'm posting, be it videos or whatever. But they're also posting and responding to each other.
Oh, I love that.
So it takes the pressure off you as the creator that you're not the only one trying to drive the content. Everyone's driving the content. And so I'm sure a lot of these people would say, I'm not even necessarily there for Matt anymore. I'm there for all these relationships that I'm making.
That's awesome. So the way I do Patreon is probably the dumbest way to do it from the standpoint of like trying to make money.
Okay.
Because I don't have levels.
Yeah.
I basically said, look, there are some people that need, to be able to interact with me on here that can only afford X.
Yeah.
And there are others that can afford more. So like if you go to my Patreon, there's a video in the front where I say, look, my philosophy of giving is this. You ask Jesus what he wants you to give and then do what he says. But if there's something that you need from me, it's not going to be connected to a certain level.
Right.
Okay.
So the way
how does locals work?
Well, the way I would, the nice thing about Patreon, of course, is that everyone gets equal. They don't, do they? They don't get equal access. That's right. You can put up a post just for your $20 support, things like that. So for me, when I would use Patreon, what I was doing is I was giving everything I was posting, whether you give $1 or $20 or $100, but that I had these different gifts attached to certain things. So that was the big differentiator. No, on locals, they don't have a tiered system.
Oh, I love that already.
They have, you can give monthly or you can give annually, or you can just turn the monthly off and just have one option.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So I'll definitely check that out.
They did not pay me to say that, but I will say they have been incredibly helpful. Like I'm surprisingly, I'll do something on transgenderism and I'll like share it with them. Like, what do you guys think about this? And like, it's fantastic. It's great. And they're like Orthodox Jews and some Christians and maybe some atheists, and they're really not just trying to get like people on the right. They want anyone who's for free speech.
It's not the Rumble of YouTube.
Is it the Rumble? Well, no, it would be the Rumble of.
Yeah,
it would be an equivalent. In fact, they're. So now you need to explain what you mean by that.
What I mean by that is like everyone always like. I feel like the super conservative tradie people are always like,
got you.
Put this on Rumble.
No, you're exactly right.
That's the
but I think the reason for that is it is conservative voices that are getting cancelled, not leftist voices. But I'm sure 100%. Rumble would have the same policy where they want people on the left to come over as well. They're not trying to make it an echo chamber. It's been really excellent, and the people there have been equally amazing to me as I've bought into this. Sometimes people are like always responsive in the beginning until you buy in and then they're nowhere to be found. Yeah. It's been terrific. So
did you like delete your Patreon altogether? Or?
No. So what I did, and I would advise this for people who are on Patreon and you want to move over to locals. Again, I don't care. I don't work for locals, right? But if you did want to do that, I did a transition period for about 6 months. Right. And the way I did that is, instead of saying, if you're a patron or a local supporter, instead of doing that, I would say, so if you support me on Patreon or locals, so instead of saying patrons, I changed the word to supporters. And everything I put on locals, I also put on Patreon for like the first 6 months. But my pinned post on Patreon was, here's 3 months free. Please come join me over on locals. I don't think
Patreon didn't care.
Well, Patreon, no, I don't think they care, but they're not gonna. I don't think they even pay attention to that. But if I get banned on YouTube, then I'm gonna. If I get banned on Patreon, I'm gonna be over on locals.
Right.
If I get banned on YouTube now, I have so many people who follow me, because you can follow without supporting. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
So when I do these live streams in the morning, people get a notification they can watch even though they're not paying anything. So I like that. So if I get banned on YouTube, then if I got banned on Patreon, you've got locals. But if I get banned on YouTube too, now I've got a large following.
That's so awesome. I think about that sometimes. I think like for my own ministry, I go, okay, I need to offer something just for my supporters, this and that. But then I always feel bad about that. I'm always like, oh, these people support me because they like what I'm doing and they want me to reach other people. So I'm always afraid, like, if I do something, and it's just an issue I have with my own self, trying to figure out what I'm called to do with it. But like, I'm always afraid if I do something just for these group of people, what if there's somebody out there that needs to hear it, but they didn't, which I don't know. I just probably need to figure that out.
That's fair enough. But I guess the other thing to consider is if you allow people to support you, then you might be able to hire more people and make your message grow. And that's certainly been, like, I've got about 7 or 8 people who work for Pints with Aquinas, and that never would have happened if it weren't for local supporters. So
I think I get in my own way sometimes with that kind of stuff, No,
but it's a beautiful intention. I mean, your intention is they're supporting me so I can share with the world, Yeah. And there have been times I've shared stuff just for local supporters, and locals was like, please make this
needs to
public.
go out.
Like, we don't care. We just want to support you, and I do.
Like, dude, I really, really enjoyed your post that you made the other day on YouTube talking about how we're to deal with the crisis. And I remember thinking to myself, I watched that with my wife. We were driving home, and we watched that, and I was like, I thought this to myself, and I wanted to ask you about it. Why doesn't Matt do more of that? Like, you're phenomenal at this, obviously, but like, you have a lot of things that you could help with beyond this, even. I think that maybe you do that in other places, but
yeah, fair enough. That's kind of you. I mean, I do kind of chat with people on locals, and we do that. That's why we call it morning coffee. It's basically a podcast that comes out every morning, and some mornings I miss it. I'm not as faithful as you are on the Rosary one, but when I do, we usually kind of like look at teachings from St. Thomas or what saints have said about this, or we just hang out and chat. Yeah, I don't know why I don't do it. I think I really get sick. I hate listening to my own voice. So if I listen to a video, like if I listen back to this interview and I hear me speaking, I'm like, I just want to fast forward and listen to you.
Oh, my goodness.
And I think it's one of my greatest pleasures is to put wonderful folks like yourself in that seat so people can see just how beautiful Catholic people are. You know, like there's so many amazing voices.
There really are.
And many people are familiar with you, many people won't be. And so to be able to introduce you to them is a joy, you know, so. All right.
Awesome. Sorry to whoever was asking more questions and I went on a different tangent, but
no, let's go. Okay. We have so many questions here. Let's see. How do you better eliminate distractions when you pray the Rosary?
Oh man. Okay. So to me, the Rosary and distractions are all about one thing: the mysteries. Focusing on the mysteries of the Rosary is huge for me. Like I'm constantly imagining myself on that journey of whatever we're going through with that day's mystery. Like that sets the stage for me. And if I do feel myself starting to get distracted, you know, I pull myself back with the next beat. But I've had those moments too where I've had to start over. Like I've had that, you know, mostly when I was on my own doing it, where I would just get so out of whack, I would be like, okay, that didn't count. I need to start over. But the biggest thing, I mean, practical things are, when are you praying your Rosary? I mean, a good time to pray, or anytime you pray is a good time to pray. But sometimes better than others. If you're like, well, I pray my Rosary on the way to work. Okay, that's fine, but you're going to get distracted. You're going to. Mm-hmm. If you say, well, I pray my Rosary when my kid's having soccer practice and I'm on the sideline. Okay, if that's the only time that works for you, great. But what's better is when you can devote yourself just to that. So find a way to put yourself in an environment where you eliminate those distractions so that you're training yourself to do that. Mm-hmm. And maybe that will help, but you have to do what you have to do. If the only time you get is in between things, the Lord knows that, the intention of your heart. Sometimes I feel like it's more grace. Maybe I'm not right in this, you can tell me, but sometimes I think we get more grace when we don't feel like doing it and we do it anyway. Yeah. Or when we are distracted, but we persevere.
I also think too, though, not to push back on that, because I agree with everything you just said.
No, feel free.
Yeah, but I also think too, like sometimes it puts too much pressure on people if the only time, because I think most people are like, well, obviously it's not the only, I guess I could find time.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes too, maybe you enjoy praying the Rosary while you're walking, and you know yourself well enough that if you were to try to devote, say, 15 minutes to be in a silent chapel every day, you wouldn't do it. And so you're like, okay, well, I'm gonna do what I can do. I'm gonna pray the Rosary on my walk or on my drive to work, and certainly there are going to be perhaps more distractions. Sometimes not, though. Sometimes moving is a way to kind of help you keep the focus in a way that sometimes sitting in a silent room doesn't. But
when I first started praying the Rosary, I prayed it on my motorcycle. Wow. That's how I.
Don't you have videos of you on a motorbike?
Oh yeah, like I have a whole playlist on YouTube called Moto Proprio. That is just me with a webcam, or not a webcam, with like a GoPro on my chin cam. That's and then amazing, a microphone, dude. Just driving around talking about things. Oh, dude, those have had mixed results, but I enjoy those. Those are fun to make.
Michael asks, for Protestant members of small churches, what's the most prudent way to leave for Catholicism, especially if your family isn't going to leave with you?
What's the most prudent way to leave? Wow. Is he a pastor or just like a dude?
I think he's just a Protestant member in a small church, he says.
I think you just have to pull the Band-Aid off and do it. You know, there's no easy way to do that. There's wrong ways to do it. To stand up and maybe shout from the rooftops, "Oh, you heretics, I'm leaving." I mean, when I first left my church, Matt, you said was his name?
Sorry, Michael.
Michael. When I first left my church, I wrote a letter to the church about why I was leaving. That got rejected by the church council. They're like, "You can't say that," because it was very much it was rooted in some of the things that I was upset about in the denomination and less about Catholicism. It was more like
what you were running away from
exactly.
and what you were running to.
So in wisdom, they came to me and said, hey, don't talk about that. Talk about where you're going.
Yeah, I like that.
And so that's to helpful. Me, that's what I would say as well. Like talk about the joy of why you're going there, and not like don't slam any doors on the way out.
This fella, it's funny, sometimes they have names like Matt or Jenny or Aaron. This guy apparently is called GS7181.
Ah, 181. Okay.
Yeah, not 182.
Yeah.
I am a convert by the grace of God. I was also baptized twice as a Presbyterian and a Southern Baptist. My father was raised Presbyterian. My mother was an evangelical. When they decided to switch to Southern Baptist, the whole family had to be baptized in water fully.
Yep.
So, was I not a child of God with the first one? I think you can kind of refer to like being a child of God in different senses, right? So like in one sense, every human being that is currently living or has lived has been children of God in one sense, but they weren't regenerate Christians, right? And so, well, you go.
Well, no, I like where you're going with that.
Yeah, because I also think that... there's that scene in the book of Acts where the Holy Spirit falls upon those who are not yet baptized, right? But then he commands them to be baptized. So it's not as if, as the Catechism of the Catholic Church says, we are bound by the sacraments, but God is not bound by the sacraments. But certainly the ordinary means by which we become regenerate is through the sacrament of baptism. And so if your first one wasn't valid, and it sounds like it may have been, right?
Yeah, that would be the question I would ask is why wasn't it valid? You know, I mean, obviously the Catholic Church accepts as valid any baptism that's done in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit.
I think what he's saying
water.
Is according to the Baptists, right? So he's talking about, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, according to the Baptists, you weren't.
Okay.
You know, that's why they rebaptize people, but it doesn't do anything.
And I suppose there's different strands in Baptist theology too, right? I'm sure many Baptists who are like, well, baptism's not strictly necessary.
Sure,
Of course you're a Christian once you confess your sins and accept Christ. Okay. Aaron says, what are youth these days hungry for, and how can we minister to them well? I
think, man, you know, I went to Mass this morning at the chapel up here at Steubenville, and I was just looking around. I'm like, man.
Was it packed?
It was packed. And I'm like, the young people I've met here since I've been here, I'm like, I feel great about the future of the church. Because here's the thing. The youth aren't the future of the church. They're the church right now. So we have to treat the youth as though they matter right now. And we don't dumb the faith down to them. We don't talk to them. What the youth are looking for is inspiration. And unfortunately, that's the last thing we give them. We give them a cheap imitation of the world's fun and a little nice moral therapeutic teaching. And we call that, youth ministry. What we need to be giving them are inspirational examples of amazing, loving adults in the faith that are going to walk with them and challenge them and show them in real time what Catholicism looks like as an adult. And that will inspire them to take it on for themselves. But a lot of times what we do is we think, well, they're youth. They can all they want to do is like go skating and eat pizza, right? No, they don't need the church to plan their fun. They can do that themselves. They need the church to lead them spiritually and to lead them in the faith. And they need to be inspired in order to do that.
This person says, sorry, not a question. I had no idea supporters could create posts in the group until Matt mentioned in the interview. Cool. All right, well, that's good. This guy says, who is Keith Nestor? Okay, you should probably know that by now.
I'm nobody.
You're everything to our Lord. Kristen says, I'd love for you to ask him how to separate the chaff from the wheat regarding Catholic YouTube channels.
Okay.
By way of explanation, anyone who begins a video-based ministry is charismatic in front of a camera to begin with, but not all are representing Catholicism so well of late. It worries me that folks don't always have the tools at hand to scrutinize them for truthfulness and or catechesis. Obviously not a reflection on you two fine gentlemen. I mean, it's a fair point. Just because somebody says that they're Catholic or says they run a Catholic YouTube channel doesn't mean you can trust everything that they're saying. Did you encounter that as you started entering into the YouTube and podcast world?
I encounter it all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. YouTube is amazing and really problematic at the same time.
Kind of like the Catholic Church. Here comes everyone.
Yes.
Just
I think,
a lot of different people.
I don't know. Like for me, the thing about YouTube is this. I want to be helpful on YouTube. That's what I feel like. That's the best we can be. Some people are on YouTube to be entertained. Some people are on YouTube to learn stuff. And there's nothing wrong with any of those things, by the way. Yeah. But some people are on YouTube because that's their soapbox, or that's the platform that allows them to air their grievances. Mm-hmm. And it's up to each of us to decide whether or not we're going to tune in. Some people think that whatever's on YouTube, you just have to watch it. And I remind people all the time, nobody put a gun to your head. You don't have to watch this channel. If it's not helpful to you, if it's not guiding you in the faith, if it's freaking you out, if it's scary. And I've had to do that. There have been channels, and I'm not going to name them, that I've was into, and then I've kind of pulled back on because maybe at one point in my journey I needed to learn this, but then now I'm not so much interested in this part of it, or maybe the channel changed directions or whatever. You have to have custody of your own eyes and your own heart, so that whatever media you're consuming, no matter where it is, whether it's YouTube, whether it's books that you read, whatever you listen to, those are things that are being compared to a standard. And to me, the standard is this: what does the church teach? That's what I care about. Now, that doesn't mean that I only watch YouTube about what the church teaches. But if I'm watching somebody who purports to be a Catholic, I want to know that what they're saying is in accordance with what the church teaches. And if it's not, that they're upfront about that too. Yeah. So, for example, if you're watching a Protestant YouTube channel, you don't go, well, that doesn't have, okay, but they're purporting to be a Protestant channel. Yeah. So for Catholic YouTubers, I think you just have to do your diligence. And if something feels off, if something feels weird, maybe ask your priest about it, or talk to someone that you trust about it, or dig a little bit deeper. Maybe that person's willing to respond to a question. You can ask them, hey, you said this in your video. What did you mean by that? People do that to me all the time. So, but I think that's up to each of us to recognize what's going to be helpful to us and what's not going to be helpful to us.
What are some of your, do you watch Catholic YouTube videos?
I do.
What are some of your favorite videos to watch, or channels? Yeah.
Okay, so Gabi After Hours is probably one of my favorite ones, and I got to hang out with Gabriel when I was in Texas. We did some stuff together.
That's awesome. He seems like a great dude. I've seen some excellent videos come out of that channel.
He's an amazing guy, and his channel is amazing. Like, because I come from a photography background too, so I also love things that are artistic and amazing. Of course, I love Pints with Aquinas. Everybody probably says that, but I really do. I love Michael Lofton. I've Reason to Theology. I've been to Michael's place and hung out with him. So I know Michael goes in a direction sometimes people don't like. I also think that's helpful. He provides sort of a kind of a yin to the yang that's out there in some ways, if I can use that analogy. Yeah. I really love, this is kind of a nerdy one, but I really love classic Catholic audiobooks.
Classic Catholic audiobooks?
Yes.
All right.
So that's literally a channel where you can just go on and they have like all of the classic Catholic audiobooks.
Come on.
Like,
are they done well?
They're done okay.
They're done well enough.
They're done well enough. They're done as well as like a LibriVox recording if you want to listen to something. So if I'm on like a long drive, that's a good thing for me. I also love
I'll throw some out as well. Yeah. I love How to Be Christian.
I love that. Ferris.
That fella.
How to Be Christian is
brilliant.
Brian Holdsworth is great.
Love Brian Holdsworth. Trent Horn stuff. Every time he puts something out, it's just ridiculously great.
So I feel like when I start,
Heschmeyer now has his channel. It's doing excellent, I think.
I feel like whenever I say any names, I'm always leaving somebody out. But I mean, there are some I just kind of take for granted. But of course, anything Catholic Answers does, I love. Joe and Trent, and my favorite YouTube channel of all time was probably Laura Horn's channel. Too Far Laura Horn. I mean, like I've never been. Whenever she puts a new video up, I'm like, hey, look, Laura made a new video. I'm like, me and my wife will watch it. I'm like, her. She's great.
We screen them before we play them, but my kids love Laura.
Oh my gosh,
my kids have actually climbed into bed and said, Dad, can we watch a Laura Horn video? I'm like, I can't believe that people are, because I know Laura well, I know Trey, I'm sure so it's weird for people to say that, but they think of her like just some celebrity. And then she came on my show and she was at our house hanging out with me and my wife, and they were like, Laura's here.
That's cool. And there's many more that I'm not saying that I mean I could mention, but I do watch a lot of YouTube, but I also watch a lot of non-Catholic YouTube too. Yeah, I love watching. I'm a huge motorcycle guy, so I love watching moto vlogs. I love watching barbecue stuff. I'm a barbecue nerd.
Nice. Jeff Cavins is a big motorcycle guy.
Is he really? I didn't know that.
He's given it up finally. I think it always made his wife uncomfortable, I think, so he's finally given it up. But for the longest time, they would do like cross-country trips, cross Canada, across the States.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that stuff.
So what kind of bike do you have then? Is it?
I have an Indian. It's a.
I shouldn't have asked that question because I wouldn't have known anything you just said. So.
It's a performance bagger.
Which means?
You know what that means? I was just kidding. So it's got a fairing on it. It's got saddlebags on it. It's kind of like an old man bike.
Yeah.
But it's really cool. So Indian is actually the first American-made motorcycle company.
Okay.
Harley started in 1903. Indian started in 1901. The Harley people are all freaking out right now because Indian's been bought and sold so many times, so that the current iteration of Indian motorcycles now has nothing to do with who originally made it.
Yeah.
But it's actually, the bikes are made in Iowa, where I live.
Really?
So that's cool. But I had a Harley for years.
So what's the debate on the better quality, Harley or is it India or
Indian?
Indian.
Yeah. Well, Harley guys a lot of times think that Harleys are the best, and Indian people think they're the best, and I think they're both awesome. So, I mean, I don't think there's really any company out there right now that's making a really bad motorcycle.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you have a Japanese cruiser or a European or whatever, chances are it's probably decent.
I remember somebody told me that if you if your bike falls over, let's say you come to a stop sign and falls over, you can't pick that thing up. And that never occurred to me because I've never ridden a motorbike before.
Well,
some of them at least.
There's a technique to it.
Okay.
If you know how to do it correctly, you can.
All right, so tell me how that.
The way that you do it.
You're not going to be able to do it without visuals.
Is you have to like get down, put your butt on the ground, and you reverse squat and push against it with your back.
Okay.
Until it comes back up. So my motorcycle is huge, like an 850-pound motorcycle.
Wow.
If it were to fall over, I'm told that's the way to do it. I've never had to do that.
Yeah.
But that's the way I'm told you're supposed to do it.
Have you ever been any near misses, or you ever had any things that you're like, I'm not going to ride a bike again after that?
I almost hit a deer once last year.
Oh, wow.
And that's probably the closest near bit. But I've never crashed. I've never really been in an accident. I've never laid it down. I'm not that diehard of a rider. I mean, I love motorcycles, but I'm not riding, thousands and thousands and thousands of miles a year. I like to do a few trips a year. La Crosse, Wisconsin is about 3 hours from my house, and there's a beautiful shrine to Our Lady of Guadalupe up there. That's a great ride. I go up there 2 or 3 times a year.
Beautiful.
And do things like that.
I think my wife and I hope one day, once the kids are grown, we'll do what you do with the van. My wife loves the idea of us getting an RV, but we have a really large dog and 4 kids, and it just seems really chaotic. I don't know if I could do it.
Well, here's an invitation. If you ever want to borrow it, you can borrow the van.
You're very kind.
And we will watch your kids and your dog, and you guys can take a trip and go somewhere awesome in the RV. You'll love it.
Well, you can stay in a house in Steubenville.
Sounds great.
Yeah, all right, deal. Yeah, thank you. All right, yeah, man, so many questions. What's next?
I've
keep
got
praying the rosary and
we're going to keep praying the rosary. I did write a book about the rosary this last year called Unpacking the Mysteries of the Rosary. And it's a devotional book revolving around the scriptural meanings of the mysteries and the practical application of that. Mm-hmm. So I'm really proud of it. It's the thing I'm the most proud of that I've ever created. Great. Is this book about the rosary, which I never thought I would do that. So I love doing all that. The thing I'm also really fired up about is this new podcast called Unpacking the Mass. It started off just as YouTube videos, because I have another podcast called Catholic Feedback, where
So how many podcasts do you have?
I have 2 podcasts, 2 YouTube channels. I have a hard time saying no, Matt.
Yeah, all right.
But Unpacking the Mass is something that I think is really needed in the church these days.
I see.
Where people can be prepared to go to Mass. That's the way I talk about that. It's not a substitute for your priest's homily. It's a preparation so that you have ears to hear what Jesus wants to speak to you through the homily. Mm-hmm. So it's really like a warm-up. But a lot of people tell me it's really all they got. No, because they'll tell me, Keith, our priest doesn't even talk about the readings, which I think is just, unbelievable. But this is where we find out what God is doing through the readings. So that's the thing. It's funny because that's the thing I'm most excited about, but it's the thing that's least consumed on anything that I do, which as a YouTube content creator or whatever is a little bit frustrating because, like everybody else, you want to make your channel grow. You want to do things people want. And one of the things I've struggled with is I feel like it's easy to get a lot of views if you do things that are controversial, or if you say negative things about people, or you're trying to create some kind of panic in people.
Yes.
You see it all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm just not wanting to do that. But at the same time, like what I want to do doesn't always seem to like be the thing that grows.
Yep.
So I have to always have, like, I feel like the Lord's always having this battle with my flesh saying, Keith, it's not about growing the YouTube channel. It's about growing the kingdom of God. And this is what you're supposed to do. This is what's helpful. This is what's needed. It doesn't matter if it's not, the biggest sensation on YouTube. Don't worry about that. This is helping people.
I totally hear you, and yet at the same time, you've got over 60,000 YouTube subscribers. So it's certainly
I
not a
have
small
no
channel.
clue why people subscribe to my channel like that in that way.
Was
like,
this morning, this rosary?
Yeah, that was this morning before I came over here.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's a great hotel, isn't it?
It was so beautiful. Yeah, so nice.
What's one video that you posted on YouTube that maybe you were surprised got so much reach? Or...
Oh my gosh. I made a video called What to Say to People Who Hate the Catholic Church. And it was a moto proprio. It was on a motorcycle one.
Okay.
And I think it's got like 80,000 views.
Wow.
With every other motorcycle video has like just a couple thousand, And this one like just kind of went viral for whatever reason. And I was completely shocked because those videos are typically totally ad-libbed. I'm just riding the bike and whatever comes to my mind, I don't edit, I don't whatever. It's kind of like my own therapy session.
Yep.
And I had been encountering so many people.
Moto proprio. I'm looking at it now as you're talking, yeah.
I had encountered so many people who just hate the church so much. I seem to attract a lot of that on YouTube.
Okay.
And I just wanted to talk about how do we deal with that? What do we say to
I'm
people?
looking at it now. Yeah, the best things to do. That's a really cool camera.
It's just a GoPro.
Yeah, it's nice. There's something kind of soothing about watching this.
I think so.
Your bike cruising along.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gee, that's neat, dude.
So everybody check out Moto Proprio if you want to. But
it's wild, isn't it? Like on YouTube, you put something up you think will do well, and maybe it doesn't, and you put something up as an afterthought, and it blows up, and you have no idea why or how.
I have the former happen a lot where I think, okay, this is going to be good, this is whatever, and then it's like nothing. So it's so funny, Matt, because when my channel first started, the only reason why it started was because somebody sent me a video file of a talk I gave that I didn't have any intention on doing anything with.
Yeah.
I didn't know anything about YouTube. The description to the talk and the title, like I let YouTube, it's still on my conversion story. Like
yeah,
I didn't pick the thumbnail. I didn't make a thumbnail. It's just whatever YouTube put up there, and it's a ridiculous picture of me like, and it literally said, the description said, Protestant becomes Catholic. And I thought, okay, that's what it is. But,
I do think there is, we have to avoid being too clever on YouTube. I think sometimes just a simple thumbnail with no text, no fancy things, just you looking at the camera, and a title that says what the video is exactly what people are looking for. They don't want to have to figure out what this thing is. They need to know immediately what it is.
I remember
if it's
feeling that
confusing,
way.
you'll keep scrolling.
Yeah, and it's the same thing with like intros. I remember like when everybody was all like watching Peter McKinnon videos all the time. Do you know who he is?
No.
That's so funny that you don't know who Peter McKinnon is. He's like the most influential YouTuber in the world, like in terms of how to make YouTube videos.
Oh, really?
It's so hilarious that you don't know who he is because you have like this amazing YouTube channel.
Peter
McKinnon.
Yep.
He's not Catholic or anything.
Before you look at him, I cannot do anything Peter McKinnon does. I'm not talented
he's
enough.
incredible.
And I just want you to know that.
Before you look to me and think that maybe you could start doing this, I cannot.
Like you see all these like technically amazing intros and everything. Like you think to yourself, okay, I have to do this. And it was funny. I was talking to my wife yesterday about this. When I started my first podcast, Catholic Feedback, I made this ridiculous intro. Like I'm a music guy, so I like recorded drums, guitar. I made like this heavy metal song from scratch, and it was like super cheesy. It was like, all right, everybody, welcome to, and I literally said, so in the words of Jesus Christ and Dewey Finn, upon this rock, let's rock. Okay. And that was Dewey Finn's from School of Rock, Okay. It was so cheesy, and I put all this work into it, and then I played it for my ministry team. And they're like, yeah, that's really bad. And they're like, we don't want you to use that. And I was like crushed. I'm like, but you don't know. This is so cool. So we went with a little bit more of a normal one, and it's much better. But I'm always feeling the tension between doing things that I think are cool versus what people want to see. And there's always that weird tension.
Yeah. And it's always a moving target because sometimes trends come and go and you think you've locked it down and then something changes and then you might need to adapt, right? But for us, like we would have this cool intro, even on our clips, you may remember we'd have Pints with Aquinas and the logo would kind of evolve. Yeah. We got rid of that because when people click, we want their attention immediately. Mm-hmm. Also, when they kind of on the YouTube app and it starts playing, we want them to be gripped right away. So we have no fancy intros, and there's a reason for that. It's not because we couldn't pay for it, but we just
that was the trend a few years ago. And you could like download the templates and make these cool, and everybody had like a 3-minute intro, and then finally like somebody had the bright idea of saying, okay, we're sick of that. Yeah. So now it's like,
wait around for 3 minutes.
Don't have an intro. So I have a very small intro on some of my videos. Some of them I don't. Mm-hmm. The Rosary Crew has one that's just sort of become our little. It's almost like a dog whistle. The music plays, the thing goes, and people tell me their dogs come into the room when it's time to pray the rosary when they hear the song. But I don't know. Like those trends are you have to be aware of them, but not in love with them.
Yeah. Even Joe Rogan, you'll notice if you listen to his audio podcast, he'll do an intro maybe about the dates he's traveling and advertisements, right? But on the video, it was never like that. Even back when he was on YouTube, it was immediately into the conversation with no lead in, no intro,
I feel like as a consumer, that's what I am too. Right? I'm like, just get to the point. Like my biggest pet peeve on YouTube is when someone just doesn't get to the point. It's like 8 minutes and you haven't told me what you were going to tell me. I'm already gone. Yeah. So I like want to be right.
What are some things you've learned then? And I know you say you're new to it and all that, but you've got a successful YouTube channel. What have you learned?
Well, first of all, I've learned that, this goes without saying, you can't please everybody. You have no control over what YouTube's going to do with your video. So there's no sweet sauce to making something go viral. You have no control over that. You have to do YouTube. So I'll give you a philosophical thing I've learned and then like a practical thing I've learned. The philosophical thing I've learned is that you have to make content that you love to make. Yeah. That you'd make it whether, I don't want to say nobody was watching, but if it was like you and 20 of your friends, you'd still want to do it. Yeah. Because then you'll be able to keep going. If you get too frustrated when it doesn't take off, if it's all about the numbers, you won't persevere. The practical thing I've learned is that you've got to be very direct in what you're going to say. You can't beat around the bush. You have to get right to the point, get to the, don't bore us, get to the chorus, Nice. Less talk, more rock kind of thing, like let's just get right into what we're going to say. And whatever you put in your thumbnail or your title, that's what you have to do. Mm-hmm. Like people have very low tolerance these days for clickbaity things that don't deliver.
Dave Rubin's been doing a lot of that Thursday.
So there's a term developing for this now.
What's that?
It's called promising and deliverance. And delivering. So it's like it's an actual measurable thing. If you like look into, I spend a lot of time looking into how YouTube works and what works for analytical reasons. But basically, what you're doing with a thumbnail and a title is you're making a promise to the audience, and what you're doing in a video is delivering. And so the hook in the video is immediately delivering, and then you skip back to the beginning and you build up to the full delivering. So,
but aren't they worried that people won't watch to the end? Because I've always heard that too in like YouTube.
Oh yeah, like you have to promise with the thumbnail, and then you also have to immediately deliver on some of the promise,
but not all of it, right? You got to keep them.
You got to keep a little bit of it, yeah.
So stay to the end, and I'll give you one extra tip on how to have a good YouTube channel.
I don't notice people saying that anymore these days, but yeah. Yeah, but I fully agree with you about like, would I be doing this if 20 people were watching? Is it worth doing for 20 people and no more to watch, or isn't it? And if it isn't, I think you're right. Because I heard the statistic on people who start a YouTube channel or start a podcast and they never get past episode 1.
Yeah, I think a lot of times you can also get so wrapped up in trying to make it perfect that it becomes this thing that you can't ever recreate. So there's a lot of balance with YouTube to where it has to be good quality, but it also has to be not overly produced.
Yeah, I think people are forgiving of a grainy mic in the way that a grainy camera in the way they're not forgiving with a bad microphone. You know
Yeah,
what
if
I mean?
your audio's terrible, no one's
Then
going to listen to what you have to say.
everything's terrible.
Like, I mean, you look at like Father Mark Goring, he just uses his iPad.
Yeah.
You know, he doesn't do any editing or anything like that. And he's got so many people that watch his YouTube channels, you know, and then you got other people who do all this elaborate production, which is, you know, really cool if they love it. But again, it's kind of like, never believe that all of that is going to equal YouTube success.
Never at all.
Because I've watched YouTube channels that are like, How to Be Christian is 10,000 times better than anything I'm doing, and yet I think it has less subscribers, you know?
Yeah.
So I've always been like blown away by that. I'm like, why doesn't this guy have way more subscribers than I do?
And then on the other hand, you'll see somebody, Dry Creek Wrangler School. That's my fella. This is
Dry Creek Wrangler
I think he's
School.
from Tennessee. He just sits and smokes a cigar and gives advice. Big bearded, manly looking dude, and he's got 600,000-700,000. No editing, no intros.
I think what ultimately matters is people care about what you have to say, you know, or if they care about what you have to say.
Yeah, people will be interested or they won't be, and you can't trick them into being interested.
100%.
I was told that in the beginning, the main metric was how quickly you'd click on a thumbnail and whether you'd click on it. After that, of course, they inserted the idea of how, you know, video watch duration.
AVD.
So, was it good?
Average view duration.
Average view duration.
Yeah, and you all watch
So
that
not
little
enough to
thing,
click
and you're like,
on it.
oh, don't go.
It's not enough to click on it. People have to want to stick around.
So let me ask you a question. If you were going to make a different type of YouTube content, what would it be?
That's a good question.
Like, what do you watch and you go, man, that's cool. I wish I was doing that. I mean,
I don't watch a lot of YouTube videos. I watch like the Daily Wire guys sometimes, their clips. But I don't really, I have no kind of genre of thing that I'm into. I like when people are into things, but I'm not really into it. I don't know. I think I might do just kind of more solo chatting, maybe about the scriptures or things like that. That might interest me, but yeah, I don't know. That's not a good answer, is it?
If it's the right one, it is. I don't know.
Yeah. What about you?
I don't know. I would love to do more motorcycle content.
Yeah.
You know, if I could figure out, because the way I think about it is I've always found a way in my life to connect the thing I like to do that's not related to my faith.
Yeah.
So like music for a while was, you know, a huge part of my life. So I did a lot of things with that, you know, and I've just been able to do that with some things.
I liked your setup too. I mean, it really is important what a person's setup. It's got to tell you something about the person. Maybe it doesn't have to, but it helps when it does. And so for you having those Marshall amplifiers and those guitars, like, all right, he's into rock and roll.
Yeah, it's so funny because I just took all that stuff down. But
did you? Why?
Well, I took the guitars down. I don't really know why. I think I was just bored. I get bored a lot of times with what I'm doing. So sometimes I'll get this wild idea. I'm just, I just got to redo everything. And then whatever I do, it ends up looking exactly like what I just did. Because
See
it's
how
like
different it is?
Yeah.
No. Not at all.
I used to have like all these like posters of different bands and stuff behind me because my YouTube area in my house is like my music room. So I had all of these like posters of these different bands. And then I started getting like, people would like give me a hard time about that.
Yeah.
They're like, what's that? Is that Catholic? Yeah. This and that. So I was just like, all right, you know what? I don't feel like dealing with that. This
is why we can't have nice things, people.
A lot of that. So I don't know. I'm always trying to figure out how to do better with whatever. But I've gotten past the point of going, oh, well, the answer is a different camera or a different light. I've got all that stuff that I need. I just need to be faithful with what God's called me to do and do that the best I can. And then leave it in his hands. And I think that's really a lesson for all of us.
I also know that this YouTube channel could be far more successful if I made it such and hired enough people such that we could do this every night. Like every night, 7 p.m., couple of hours, I'll fly people in. I could do that. I do not want to do that. So I try to do these once a week. They come out, you know.
Well, you've got kids at home. You've got a wife. You got to, you know, like.
Yeah, that's right. But I mean, you know, like if you're hungry enough, you'll figure it out. You could be like, well, I'm with the kids all day, and then I come in at 7 p.m. and then I record. Like, there's probably a way I could do it. It's not just for a lack of time. It's from a lack of desire, and I think that's also okay. Is what I'm trying to say.
Oh, it's 100% okay.
Yeah,
I think that's the great thing about YouTube is everybody gets to do whatever they want. Sometimes I'll have people that will reach out to me and tell me what I should do on my YouTube channel. I'm sure that never happens to you, Matt.
But yeah.
But I'll have people that will say, hey, well, you need to be doing this kind of rosary. You need to pray the prayer this way. You need to do this. You need to do that. I mean, it's.
I think I prayed the rosary once on my YouTube channel and got like 2,000 criticisms. I'm like, you know what?
Well, most of the people that have hung around with me for a long time, they just, you know how it is. Like, you tend to, the people that stick with you are the people that like what you do.
Yeah.
So, but when you're first starting, you bring in everybody that's sort of like, hey, what's that? Oh, he doesn't do it that way.
Right.
And I just was like with people, look, there's a million different ways you can pray the rosary. I'm not going to pray 87 other prayers in between the decades. We're going to do a very simple thing. I'm going to share some meditations a little bit. That's how I do it. And you're welcome to participate. If you don't want to, you don't have to. And it's amazing how many people will be like, but you did this. Like, you don't have to watch. You don't have to be a part of it. You can choose. That's the beautiful thing about YouTube. And if you really care that much, you can start your own YouTube channel and do it exactly the way that you want to do it.
And we'll see how that works out for you. Everyone will be happy.
And maybe it'll be 10 times better than this one. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, to your point about not being able to please everybody, an analogy that came to my mind is when you try to please everybody, you become as interesting as hotel art or dentist art. So you were in a hotel, right? And they've got those big posters that advertise their hotel. And the whole point of that is to advertise as broadly as possible so everybody who can read English is captivated, but it's so boring.
That's why contractors paint houses beige and white.
Okay.
Because it's the least offensive thing. Nobody likes it, but it's the least offensive thing. And I think for some people, that's their bar is, you know, how can I not offend somebody?
Right. So the point is you'll drive yourself crazy if you keep trying to sand down parts of your personality that frustrate people. Yeah, and that's a learning curve for new YouTubers. They're not aware of that. They get in and they're like overwhelmed by the criticism. I
haven't figured that out yet, Matt. I've wrestled with that a lot. It's funny, like on some of my other sort of more apologetics videos, because I do make some of those too. People will say things to me like, "Why are you so angry? Why is this guy so aggravated? Why is he angry? Why is he yelling?" I mean, I kind of talk a lot anyway, but I realized that that's just how I am. You know, I'm very rarely angry.
Yeah.
But sometimes when I make these videos, I'm responding to all of the comments because I do like a daily gospel reflection on Instagram and do a YouTube short every day.
Okay.
So I'll make like a 1-minute video in the morning on what the gospel reflection is. Okay. And that has drawn a lot of people in, like on Instagram especially. And a lot of people are just like, you know, this guy's an idiot. He's a heretic. He doesn't know this, you know. And so sometimes that will become material that I'll make a video about. Oh. And then I end up arguing with people that aren't really there. So sometimes I go, okay, I need to dial that back a little bit for this. But
well, good for you. I mean, it's humble, right? To realize your shortcomings are what you need to be aware of. And that's really good. I mean, what's nice about YouTube is there's always the hide user from channel button, which I use infrequently, but absolutely use if someone's revealing themselves and is just spewing poison. I'm like, okay, you don't have to be here anymore. Bye. That's fun.
Yeah.
You don't go into the comments blocked section very much, do you?
No.
Okay, yeah. You would use it much more if you checked that often, as I do on the daily.
Oh, it's brutal out there, man. I had a guy one time when I first started who... he commented on a video I was making and he wanted me to give him the phone numbers of every church that I ever worked at because he thought that I was a phony and a fraud and
he didn't believe
me.
Yeah.
So he was like, I need to talk to these people and I'm like, and to explain to them what a loser you are or whatever. And I was like, these are my friends. I'm not giving you their number. That's
my wife struggles with a bunch of different chronic illnesses, and we've had her on the show talking about that. And there was actually one person who just said she's a phony.
Oh,
like that's just not
that would
true.
Be instant ban. Yeah. I will ban people. I have like different rules depending on what kind of mood I'm in, but the only time I really ban people is I don't like profanity on my channel, and people start doing personal attacks against other commenters. That's when they're gone. Like, I don't care if you think I'm an idiot. If you put yourself on YouTube, you just have to expect people are going to think that. So that's understandable. But if somebody else is commenting and someone is saying negative things toward them or hurtful things towards one of my viewers or commenters, you're done. You know. Or the other one that typically get tired of is the people that just do the cut and paste comments that are like 9,000 words long, and they're not interacting with the video. They just cut and paste, cut and paste, cut and paste, and it's like every video they do that on. Like, okay, I don't care. You're done.
Yeah.
I'm sure you never deal with that either.
The worst one, far worse than all of these, is the "I'm so blessed. I made $200,000 this month," and then what they all say the exact same thing.
They have a ton of other accounts that they then
that all comment.
To
yeah,
that
the bots.
person. I did the same thing. And
have you had people impersonating you yet? Yeah, we have.
The first time that happened, that was terrifying. Now I think people are smart enough. They see it enough on YouTube. They know.
I've had that where it's, on Instagram, YouTube, all that stuff, where people are messaging me going, "Hey, is that you?" I'm like, "No, I will never ask you for money."
I had someone hack into my Instagram account.
Are you kidding me?
This is about 3 years ago. Locked me out of it and started posting pictures of Saddam Hussein.
That's awesome. That's actually a great troll.
But immediately, so I was like, I'm pretty sure this isn't Matt, right? But
you should have called him up and been like, "You want to keep posting pictures? Please give me my account back."
Oh my goodness.
That was wild because I never thought I'd get that back. But I thought, oh, praise God. What are you going to do? That
happens occasionally. I'm always terrified of that happening. But, a friend of mine who has a pretty successful Instagram prayer channel, she said, I've just given this channel over to the Lord. And if that's God's will, if that happens, then that's okay.
Yeah. As we wrap up, tell us about your first book.
Yeah. No,
I didn't realize that was self-published. The book cover's fantastic.
It's heaven shot, dude. Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, both of them. So yeah, my first book, both of my books, I just put out myself on Amazon.
Good for you.
I didn't have any. I mean, nobody.
Did you have them edited at least?
Yeah. Good. Yeah. So I went through the process to make sure they were edited and whatever. But
people don't need publishers today. They just don't.
I don't. Well, if there's some publisher out there that wants to show up and pay me a bunch of money to publish my books, give me a call. But you don't need that in order to do something.
Right. What? And your website is what? Down
to earthministry.org. Down the number 2 earthministry.org.
Okay.
So the Convert's Guide to Roman Catholicism, your first year in the church. That's the first book, and then the second one's called Unpacking the Mysteries of the Rosary. And they're both on Amazon. They're on my website too. So, Stewardship is selling them now on their site as well. But
they look great.
Yeah, but yeah, I'm very proud of them, especially the second one. The first one, I hear more from people about that because it's about people coming into the church, and I get messages weekly from people saying this book has really been a help to me. There are priests that are using it in their RCA programs now, which blows my mind.
No, wonderful.
So I'm just so blessed that this was something that would be helpful to people.
It is. You can tell it's an inspiration because it's such a great idea. As you say, there's books about how to become Catholic, but there's no okay, you just became Catholic. Here's what you should know. Don't pray every devotion. Calm down.
That's
take
a chapter.
Breath. Is that right?
I got a chapter on. It's called How to Not Have a Holy War. It's about coming out as a Catholic. How do you do that?
Yeah.
Right. How do you find a local church? Which devotions should you pray? A walk through the Mass that's a little bit more in the context of a person who's a evangelical coming in going, why is this different? So it's kind of my story woven into that. It's not really it's not like a book about my story, but I weave in examples from that about, why aren't Catholic churches more hospitable? Why don't we have greeter teams everywhere? Why when you walk into the Mass, does it feel like you just walked into a funeral? Well, there are reasons for all these things. So, and I weave in different things into that, but I hope it's helpful to people. That's
no
really
doubt,
what I wrote for.
You've got 292 reviews.
Oh, really? I didn't even know that.
On Amazon. Yeah. It's crushing it. Good for you. Well, thanks for coming on. It's been good. You were supposed to come on a while ago, you remember?
I was.
And then something happened.
Well, I was...
Probably my fault, I'm sure.
I don't think it was your fault. I was on a Rosary Crew trip coming through Steubenville. I don't know how you guys even found out, but Melanie emailed me and said, hey, we heard you're coming to Steubenville, but the dates were they didn't work with your schedule. I think you were traveling or something, so... it didn't work out, but I'm just honored to be here. I really don't feel like I belong here. I feel like
you do.
The people that I see on this channel are so I love watching it. And I love listening to you. So it's just so humbling to be here and to get to hang out. So thank you guys for watching. Everyone support Matt on Locals.
MattFradd.locals.com and soon KeithNesta.locals.com.
We're going to talk about that. But thank you so much, Matt.
Thanks, everyone. That's awesome.